Without objection, all other opening statements will be included in the record. I will now introduce today's witness. Alejandro, is that correct? Alejandro Mayorkas is sworn in as Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security by President Biden on February 2nd, 2021. Throughout his distinguished career in public service, he has served in several important roles in law enforcement, including as the Deputy Secretary of the U.S. Department of Homeland Security from 2013 to 2016, and as the Director of U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services from 2009 to 2013. Secretary Mayorkas began his government service in the Department of Justice, where he served as an Assistant United States Attorney in the Central District of California. After nearly 9 years as a federal prosecutor, he became the youngest United States attorney in the nation, overseeing numerous prosecutions of national significance. He received his bachelor's degree from the University of California at Berkeley and a law degree from Loyola Law School. We welcome our distinguished witness, and we thank him for participating today. I will begin by swearing you in. I ask that you please rise and raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm under penalty of perjury that the testimony you're about to give is true and correct to the best of your knowledge, information, and belief, so help you God? Let the record show that the witness has answered in the affirmative. Thank you, and please be seated. Please note that your written statement will be entered into the record in its entirety. Accordingly, I ask that you summarize your testimony in 5 minutes. To help you stay within that time limit, there is a timing light on your table. When the light switches from green to yellow, you have 1 minute to conclude your testimony. When the light turns red, it signals your 5 minutes have expired. Secretary Mayorkas, the floor is yours.
Chairman Nadler, Ranking Member Jordan, and distinguished members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to join you. On behalf of all of us in the Department of Homeland Security, I share in the mourning of the loss of Guardman Bishop Evans, who made the ultimate sacrifice in the service of our country. For nearly 2 decades, the personnel of the Department of Homeland Security have stood as a cornerstone of public safety. Every day, our workforce of 250,000 serves to protect our people and our values by combating terrorism and targeted violence, countering malicious cyber activity, securing our border, building a safe, orderly, and humane immigration system, and more. We do this while always safeguarding Americans' privacy, civil rights, and civil liberties, and building trust between our agency and the public we serve. We remain vigilant against all forms of terrorism and targeted violence. The nature of these threats has evolved, but our vigilance and resolve are constant. We play a leading role in implementing the first-ever national strategy for countering domestic terrorism, namely, establishing a new domestic terrorism branch within our Office of Intelligence and Analysis, launching the Center for Prevention Programs and Partnerships to help communities prevent radicalization to violence, designating domestic violent extremism as a national priority area in FEMA grant programs, increasing our investment in the Nonprofit Security Grant Program, coordinating additional support to HBCUs in the face of recent bomb threats, and ramping up our efforts to collect and disseminate actionable intelligence. On cybersecurity, DHS is leading the federal government's work to protect our critical infrastructure. We answered the Colonial Pipeline incident with security directives requiring pipeline companies to report intrusions, designate a cybersecurity coordinator, conduct vulnerability assessments, and create contingency plans. We adopted similar measures for airports, air carriers, and rail operators. We work with the Department of Justice to launch StopRansomware.gov, the first whole-of-government website with resources to help organizations combat ransomware. We are defending our democracy against foreign interference in our elections. We formed 2 bodies, the Joint Cyber Defense Collaborative and the Cyber Safety Review Board, to bring private sector and government stakeholders to the table to help us fortify our cyber defenses, identify vulnerabilities, and ensure a unified response when incidents occur. Russia's invasion of Ukraine has only intensified the threat of cyber attacks. So we initiated the Shields Up campaign to increase collective awareness, vigilance, and resilience to possible incidents. We are countering Russia's mis- and disinformation campaigns by helping stakeholders understand the scale of these activities and enabling them to mitigate associated risks. We are expanding humanitarian programs like TPS and developing new ones like Uniting for Ukrainian initiative to provide Ukrainians temporary refuge in the United States. Under this administration, our department has been executing a comprehensive strategy to secure our borders and rebuild our immigration system. With the Title 42 public health order set to be lifted, we expect migration levels to increase as smugglers seek to take advantage of and profit from vulnerable migrants. We will continue to enforce our immigration laws. After Title 42 is lifted, non-citizens will be processed pursuant to Title 8, which provides that individuals who cross the border without legal authorization are processed for removal and, if unable to establish a legal basis to remain in the United States, promptly removed from the country. We began planning last September, and we are leading the execution of a whole-of-government strategy, which stands on 6 pillars to prepare for and manage any rise in non-citizen encounters. I issued a memorandum earlier this week that provides more details of those pillars. 1, surge resources, including personnel, transportation, medical support, and facilities. 2, increase efficiency without compromising the integrity of our screening processes in order to reduce strain on the border. 3, administer consequences for unlawful entry, including expedited removal and criminal prosecution. 4, bolster the capacity of NGOs and coordinate with state, local, and community partners. 5, target and disrupt transnational criminal organizations and human smugglers. 6, deter irregular migration south of our border in partnership with other federal agencies and nations. We inherited a broken and dismantled system that is already under strain. It is not built to manage the current levels and types of migratory flows. Only Congress can fix this. Yet we have effectively managed an unprecedented number of non-citizens seeking to enter the United States and interdicted more drugs and disrupted more smuggling operations than ever before. A significant increase in migrant encounters will strain our system even further, and we will address this challenge successfully. But it will take time, and we need the partnership of Congress, state and local officials, NGOs, and communities to do so. We cannot address our core issues alone. DHS is a department of partnerships. I look forward to working together with this committee to confront our ever-changing threat landscape and protect the American people.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary, for your testimony. We will now proceed under the 5-minute rule with questions, and I will recognize myself for 5 minutes. Secretary Mayorkas, in February of last year, President Biden made you the chair of the President's Interagency Task Force on the Reunification of Families. The work of that task force is essential to reuniting those families, those children and families who were maliciously separated from their parents during the Trump administration, and to ensuring that this can never happen again. Secretary Mayorkas, can you discuss the progress that the task force has made thus far, including how many children the department has identified and reunited? What challenges does the task force face when working to establish contact with some of these parents?
Mr. Chairman, I'm very proud to be the chair of that task force, which, under the President's direction, brings the resources of the entire federal government together to work with civil society to try to reunite the families that were so cruelly separated under the prior administration. Thus far, we have reunited more than 200 separated children with their parents, and there are estimates that there are approximately 1,000 more children that remain separated. Of those 1,000 children, the task force has made contact with more than 500 parents, and nearly 400 children are now in the reunification process. We continue to partner with non-governmental organizations such as Kids in Need of Defense and Justice in Motion to contact families and direct them to our website. One of the greatest obstacles we have, Mr. Chairman, is to overcome the distrust that was sown by the prior administration through its cruel policies. Many remain still feel fearful given what trauma they experienced and continue to experience.
And the President's executive order requires the task force to issue a report containing recommendations to ensure that a tragedy like this never happens again. How soon do you anticipate issuing that report? And can you preview some of its recommendations?
Mr. Chairman, we have published interim reports along the way since we began our work. We are working on policies to make sure that no such cruelty ever occurs again. You know, I had the occasion to speak with a number of parents who were reunited with their children, and it was extraordinarily heartbreaking to hear a mother speak of the fact that despite the physical reunion, there remained a distance between her and her teenage daughter. Her teenage daughter still continued to suffer trauma from the separation that they both suffered. This is going to take time to mend the people's broken hearts and the trauma that they suffered due to such a cruel policy.
Thank you. I'm pleased to see the Biden administration has been preparing for months for the eventual end of Title 42. As you know, Title 42 is a public health measure, not an immigration control strategy. In fact, because Title 42 has no immigration consequences for repeat border crossers, the border crossing recidivism rate has quadrupled since Title 42 began. I'm sure we'll be hearing today about the record high numbers of encounters at our border. However, some 900,000 of those encounters are migrants who tried to repeatedly cross unlawfully. Smugglers are even offering package deals to encourage recidivism. Fortunately, as you mentioned in your opening, the Department of Homeland Security has put in place a comprehensive whole-of-government strategy to manage any potential increase in the number of migrants encountered at our border when Title 42 is ended. The Department is increasing its capacity to process new arrivals, evaluate asylum requests, and quickly remove those who do not qualify. Mr. Secretary, can you go into more detail for the committee about the Department's plans? I'm particularly interested in understanding what type of resources will be increased and where they'll be deployed, as well as learning more about the Southwest Border Coordination Center's role.
Mr. Chairman, the plan is very comprehensive and very detailed. We have developed it over many, many months. The end of Title 42, which is a public health authority, as you correctly described, we knew was not going to be forever, and therefore we began planning and preparing quite a long time ago. It's very detailed, but let me try to run through in the short time that I have. The Pillar 1 was surging resources, personnel, transportation, medical support, increasing facilities for the processing of individuals whom we encounter. The second pillar, increasing CBP processing efficiency. That involves such things as enhanced central processing centers, where we bring different parts of our department together to drive efficiency, where we process individuals en route to ICE facilities and decompress border patrol stations. The third pillar is a consequence regime, using Title 8 of the United States Code to expedite the removal of individuals as the law provides. Bring criminal prosecutions where the facts so warrant. Implementation of our historic asylum officer rule, which brings tremendous efficiency to the asylum system. Bolstering the capacities of non-governmental organizations and coordinating with state and local communities. Targeting and disrupting the transnational criminal organizations and the smuggling organizations. We have intensified efforts at a historic level, working not only as an entire Department of Homeland Security, but across the federal government, bringing the resources of the Department of Justice and the Department of Treasury to bear. And we are working to deter irregular migration throughout the region. This is not a phenomenon, Mr. Chairman and members of this committee, that the United States encounters alone. This is something that countries throughout the region, throughout the hemisphere, and we so powerfully have seen in recent months throughout the world. The number of individuals displaced from their home countries is greater now than it ever has been. And we are working in response to a regional challenge with a regional solution, working with our partner countries throughout the region. I was in Panama last week to accomplish that end.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. My time has expired, Mr. McClintock.
Mr. Secretary, since the administration took office, you've deliberately released into the United States 836,000 illegal immigrants who crossed our borders in violation of our laws and sovereignty. Now, that is more than the entire population of the state of North Dakota. And while the Border Patrol has been overwhelmed by this influx, you've allowed about 600,000 gotaways to escape into the interior. This is more than the entire population of the state of Wyoming. And that's with Title 42 in place. When you remove that, it's estimated that we're going to see as many as 18,000 illegal immigrants released into the interior every day. That's the same as admitting a new state of Alaska every 40 days. These numbers are simply staggering. And I'd like to know why you think this benefits Americans. Packing classrooms with non-English speaking students, flooding emergency rooms with illegals demanding care, making it harder to deport criminal illegal aliens, flooding the labor market with cheap foreign labor. How does this benefit Americans?
Congressman, if I can explain how the legal system works when encountering individuals at our southern border.
No, wait, first of all, that's not my question. My question is, how does this benefit Americans?
Congressman, when an individual is encountered at the southern border, they are placed in immigration enforcement proceedings.
Okay,
and
so
under the law,
you don't have an answer for how any of this benefits Americans. So let's talk about your enforcement proceedings. Let's define exactly what that means. An alien is given a notice to appear with a court date or simply a notice to report. Call in when you get wherever you want to go. 90% of these asylum claims are turned down, and when they are, less than 15% actually leave. Now, you have already instructed ICE that mere illegal presence in the country is not grounds for deportation, so they stay and await the next amnesty. That's what you mean by enforcement proceedings, because that's what you do.
Congressman, you've misstated the facts. Individuals are placed in immigration enforcement proceedings. Those who present a public safety threat, a threat to national security, a threat to border security, are held in detention during the pendency of those immigration proceedings. Those who do not are given a notice to appear, and the appearance rate is over 86%.
On the initial proceedings, but 90% of them are rejected, and when they're rejected, only 15% leave, and you've told ICE don't go after the others unless there's an underlying criminal situation. You've assured us that ICE prioritizes criminal removals, and that I heard you say you deported more criminals in the Trump administration. But according to data from the FOIA request from the Center for Immigration Studies, in 2021, deportations of aliens with serious criminal convictions declined by over 50% compared to 2020 and 65% compared to 2018. And according to ICE's own website, detainers for assault are down 57%. Under your leadership, detainers for weapons offenses down 52%, dangerous drugs down 49%, detainers for homicides are down 43%, sex crimes down 29%. How does this make our communities safer?
So Congressman, allow me to share some facts with you. 12,025 individuals convicted of aggravated felonies were removed in fiscal year 2021.
And that's down.
That's
down from 2020 or 2018.
Actually, you're wrong. 12,025 were individuals convicted of aggravated felonies, nearly double the 6,815 arrested in fiscal year 2020. If I may.
Aggravated felonies, what does that mean?
Well, that's a definition.
I'd call homicide an aggravated felony. Your detainers for homicides are down 42%, I believe, 43%, I should say. Weapons offenses down 52%. You're defining terms that don't actually exist.
Oh, actually.
Aggravated felony.
Congressman, the term aggravated felony is defined in statute. It is a United States law. The definition of an aggravated felon is a matter of statutory law.
Crimes like homicide are down. Your detainers.
Congressman.
I mean, those numbers are there on your website. Let me go on. You repeatedly said there's a need for reprioritizing ICE because of limited resources. Yet in 2012, with fewer agents and judges than we have now, ICE arrested and deported 409,000 aliens. Under your administration, with more agents and judges, you've deported only 59,000. That's 1/7 as many. Overall deportations
The
down.
time of the
2021,
gentleman has
down
expired.
90%
The
from
witness may
2019.
answer the question.
46% of ICE removals in fiscal year 2021 were for people convicted of felonies or aggravated felonies, compared to 18% during the previous 4 years and 17% of the year before that.
The time of the gentleman, as I said, has expired. Ms. Lofgren.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Secretary Mayorkas. Before I ask my question, I'd like to give you an opportunity. My fellow Californian, reading from his talking points, made several assertions that I think are incorrect, and you didn't get to fully explain what the facts are, and obviously what is the benefit of applying the law, well, standing up for the rule of law, which is what this country stands for. So if you would take a minute on that before I get to my questions, that would be helpful, I think.
Thank you, Congresswoman. The law provides that individuals encountered at our border have a right to make a claim for humanitarian relief under the asylum laws that the United States Congress passed. If their claim for asylum relief prevails in an immigration court, then they have established a basis to remain in the United States. If their claim fails, then they are removed from the United States. We are a nation of laws, and this Department of Homeland Security is administering the laws that Congress passed.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. You know, watching what happened in the prior administration, I'm mindful that you were inherited something of a mess in terms of the department. There were over 400 changes to the immigration system, policy changes that resulted in delays and no increase, no benefits. For example, in USCIS, repeatedly interviewing the same people over and over again on the employment-based side, leading to backlogs, questionable policy choices that nearly bankrupt USCIS. I remember in the summer of 2020, the agency was forced to send furlough notices to 15,000 employees, 70% of its workforce, and was only at the last minute working on a bipartisan basis, actually, here in the House, that we did a stopgap measure, but there was a hiring freeze, and there's millions of backlogged applications. At the same time, we saw extreme vetting of the special immigrant visa program in Iraq and Afghanistan, which actually ended up being no vetting, so that there was no processing of over 17,000 SIV cases for Afghanistan. And when the former president's timeline for removal was implemented, there was no plan in place to expedite the processing or to evacuate those allies, and those unprocessed SIV applications just continued to sit there. I'm wondering, Mr. Secretary, what steps you are taking to try to clean up the mess in the refugee program where all of it was zeroed out, and the agencies, the nonprofits and the religious-based agencies that help were basically dismantled. USCIS was hollowed out and the like. What is your plan to clean up the mess?
Congresswoman, one of the ways in which the prior administration decimated the legal immigration system is to really leave U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, the agency that administers our nation's legal immigration system, on the brink of bankruptcy. Employees were furloughed, the Asylum and Refugee Corps were decimated. That agency is funded primarily through the fees it collects from applications that people submit for immigration benefits. And the law provides that every 2 years, a fee rule is to issue to recalibrate fees according to the cost of the agency every 2 years. That agency has not had a fee rule
So we'll
for
look
more
at
than
that.
6 years. And so we are bringing it from the brink of bankruptcy to some level of financial stability. It will take time. We are promulgating a new fee rule
Okay.
as this Congress expects.
I've got one more question I want to get in. The H-2A program is an important one for agriculture in the United States, and as you know, we had a bipartisan bill to streamline and improve that provision that is languishing in the Senate. But there have been, and it's been brought to my attention, the Operation Blooming Onion case where there were some abuses of people in the H-2A program. I'm wondering, do we have adequate tools to protect H-2A visa holders from exploitation, understanding that it's an important program and, you know, I'm not saying all employers are exploited, far from it, but we want to get the bad actors.
Congresswoman, we are focusing.
Time of the gentleman lady has expired. The witness may answer the question.
We are focusing some of our enforcement resources on employers who exploit vulnerable employees and create a non-competitive labor market. That's one of our areas of tremendous focus.
Thank you.
Mr. Shabbat.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, the situation at our southern border is an unmitigated disaster, and I fear it's about to get a whole lot worse. With this administration's boneheaded decision to end enforcement of Title 42, you're essentially saying the COVID healthcare emergency is over. Come on in. While at the same time saying, nope, still got a COVID emergency, so we're going to force everybody to mask up on planes and buses and trains, whether you like it or not. Since he took office, President Biden has been busy reversing just about every one of the Trump administration's successful immigration policies, stopping construction of the border wall, ending catch and release, and practically abandoning border enforcement altogether, just to name a few of these misguided policies. The result, as I said, has been a complete and utter chaos at our southern border. Unfortunately, again, due to Biden administration policies, the chaos doesn't stop at the border. It's intentionally being spread all across the country. The Biden administration is putting illegal immigrants and asylum seekers on buses and planes at taxpayer expense, often in the middle of the night when it's not so obvious, and shipping them to communities all across the country. As a result, virtually every state in America is now directly impacted. Let's face it, we're all really border states now. Mr. Secretary, how many migrants have you shipped to Ohio, my state?
Congressman, I would disagree with the phrasing of your question, but I would be pleased to provide you with data with respect to the number of
the question's
individuals.
pretty simple. How many have you shipped to Ohio?
As I mentioned, Congressman, as I was stating, I'd be pleased to provide you with data specific to Ohio subsequent to this
I
hearing.
assume your answer is here today, you don't know. Is
I
that
don't
right?
have the data with me,
Okay.
Congressman.
I mean, because I certainly think the people of Ohio
think-
would like to know that, and in fact, I think it's their right to know how many migrants you're shipping to their state or by
Congressman,
congressional district or others. After all, they're footing the bill for all of this, right? The American taxpayers?
Congressman, I'd like to again.
Are the American taxpayers paying for this stuff?
I would respectfully disagree with the phrasing of your question, but I think it's something very important to remember, which is individuals who are placed in immigration proceedings.
That's not the question I asked. I didn't, please, we've only got 5 minutes each of us, so if you'll just answer the questions I've asked. You said, I can't tell you how many I've shipped to Ohio. I'll provide that down the road. Let's see if you actually do that. Now, the American taxpayers are footing the bill. The people that you're shipping across the country, they're being fed, right?
Congressman,
They're having their health care needs met. They're being housed somewhere.
If I
Their
may-
children are attending school, I assume. Who's paying for all that?
Congressman, you are mistaken in asserting in your question
That we're not feeding them? We're
individuals-
not housing them?
If
We're
I
not
may-
providing health care?
May I?
And it doesn't have to be paid for. I ask you, who's paying for this stuff?
Individuals in immigration proceedings are not entitled to the same benefits that United States citizens are.
I didn't say that. So, but they're not being fed? We're not feeding them?
Congressman, not to my knowledge do they receive
Okay,
public
thank you.
benefits.
So they're not being fed.
for food.
Okay. Let me ask you this. How many bus loads have you sent to my state, Ohio? Do you know that?
Congressman, as I stated previously, I will provide you with the data
Thank you.
are
Okay,
requesting.
so how many and how many bus loads? Okay. Let me ask you this. If you don't have the numbers here today, who has these numbers?
Congressman, we in the Department of Homeland Security have a wealth of data, and I would be pleased to provide you with whatever data you request.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
One of the hallmarks of our department is our openness and transparency, and in fact,
Thank you.
one of the priorities that I have established for this department for fiscal year 2022.
You've been extremely open, and we certainly appreciate that. Mr. Secretary, where does the buck really stop here? Who do we hold accountable for the chaos at our southern border? Is it you, the Secretary of Homeland Security? Is it the Vice President? Because President Biden, we know, supposedly put her in charge of the border. Or is it the big guy himself? Is it President Biden? Where does the buck really stop?
Congressman, I'm incredibly proud to work alongside the dedicated men and women of U.S. Customs and Border Protection, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, and the entire Department of Homeland Security, who tirelessly dedicate themselves to the service of our country.
Thank you. We're proud of the folks that work there, too. We wish you would support them, though. We really wish you support. They want to do their jobs. They want to secure the border. They want to uphold the law, and you took an oath to uphold the law. And right now, when you got 3 million people coming over here in a short period of time,
Time of the
you're not
gentleman
enforcing
has
the law.
expired.
Yield back.
For the purpose of a UC request, Ms. Lofgren.
Yes, I'd ask unanimous consent that a New York Times article, GOP memo shows roadmap for attacking Democrats on immigration be made part of the record.
Without objection, Ms. Jackson-Lee.
I thank the chairman very much, and I thank you for your presence here today. And as well, let me try to remind my friends on the other side of the aisle of the historical record of this country. Mr. Secretary, I hope it is not a personal question, but you had a history outside of this country in terms of your family coming from somewhere else. Is that not correct, sir?
Congresswoman, I myself am an immigrant. My family came to this country as political refugees fleeing the communist takeover of Cuba.
Let me applaud you for your service to the nation. I think, as I said in previous comments, the Statue of Liberty still stands in the New York Harbor. I assume you have seen it on 1 or 2 occasions.
I most certainly have, and I should say that what this country gave to my family is what led me to public service. First as an assistant United States attorney, then the United States attorney, then the director of U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, then the Deputy Secretary of Homeland Security, and now the Secretary of Homeland Security.
I'm glad that I allowed you to provide that into the record. Because the antics of my friends on the other side of the aisle are so without reason, it is difficult to even follow in questioning. To even suggest that the past administration had an immigration policy is absurd. Because I stood in the place that you stood watching the reunification of separated children. There was a glaze of disbelief in the child's eye as to who this person was. Was it their mother? Why had she abandoned them? It was the most criminal aspect of that policy, and I don't know how anyone could cite that as reasoned and reasonable. But let me move to what we are here for. And the general sentence, my time is short, that I want you to enunciate, is that in fact the administration does have a policy. If the scientifically based section, Article 42, is scientifically removed as it relates to the pandemic by CDC. You can just say yes or no. You have a plan.
It is a public health authority that the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention.
But you have a plan if it is removed.
Oh, most certainly.
That's the question I have.
Most certainly.
So it is yes.
Yes.
So let me go to specifically to Pillar 5, which I think is the crux of what we are speaking about. And that is we are targeting and disrupting the transnational criminal organizations, TCOs, and smugglers to take advantage of and profit from vulnerable migrants who seek to traffic drugs into our country. Can you, because I have 1 or 2 other questions, briefly talk about the scourge of human smugglers? Even though people may be coming for economic reasons, fleeing prosecution, and that is something that the federal government can put all fours on. Do you intend to deeply go to disrupt this criminal organizations, if you will, that prey on the very people that are at the border?
Congresswoman, our intensified efforts to tackle the human smuggling organizations are historic.
Give us some elements of that quickly, please.
Historic. We have a number of different operations, both within the Department of Homeland Security and across the federal enterprise, using the Department of Treasury to seize bank accounts, Operation Sentinel that Homeland Security Investigations runs, to tackle and dismantle their infrastructure, working with our intelligence community partners, working with the Department of Justice in Operation Alpha. We have so many different multifaceted efforts underway. It's really unprecedented, the level of intensity that we are bringing to tackling the transnational criminal organizations and the human smugglers.
In the course of that work, let me also say that there are organizations like CBP, Border Patrol, ICE. I want to make sure that your administration also, as they do their work, and I applaud them for their work, and I do want to as well acknowledge the individual National Guard Specialist, Bishop E. Evans. I want to express my deepest sympathy to his family and my respect for his service. We honor him. But I want to make sure as we go forward, you infuse into all of that the idea of equity and justice in terms of those migrants and others who are treated under these particular agencies, sub-agencies. Is that correct?
Yes, it is, Congresswoman.
So let me quickly go to an issue that continues to be spoken about by Director Wray, is that the largest threat to the United States is domestic terrorism and the increase in white supremacy. And I don't think it has changed from a couple of months ago to today. Give me the deep dive that you've done on thwarting domestic terrorism, particularly the rise in violence against minority institutions and faith institutions, and how we are protecting Americans through that effort, please.
So our efforts are so expansive, I won't be able to cover them all, and I would be pleased to provide further information to you, Madam Congresswoman, subsequent to this hearing. Let me give you two important examples. We created a domestic terrorism branch within our Office of Intelligence and Analysis, and it has been disseminating an unprecedented level of information and intelligence throughout the nation to our state, local, tribal, and territorial partners so that they are equipped with our latest intelligence and data so that they can counter the threat. We created the Centers for Prevention Programs and Partnership, we term it CP3, to equip and resource local communities with information and funds so that they can tackle the radicalization to violence. It's the connectivity to violence that we are focused upon so that they can ably do it. Our frontline personnel, our brave personnel in uniform throughout this country are the first line of defense.
General Lady's time is
Thank the
expired.
gentleman. Thank the Secretary. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Gomert.
Thank you. Secretary Mayorkas, in a meeting some of us had with you April 5th, you agreed to find out who gave the order to prevent members of Congress like me from going undeterred to the border to see for ourselves what has happened. Did you find out where that came from? Because the regional director said it came from Washington.
Congressman, I have inquired, and I'm not aware of any such order. I was not able to identify any such order, and in fact, of course, quite a number of CODELs have occurred since you and I met in April.
Right, but those normally, they are escorted where they're allowed to see instead of like those of us that have oversight of Border Patrol. We like to go down and just see for ourselves, no dog and pony tour, but see for ourselves what's happening. And you agree that is appropriate, correct?
Yes, Congressman, there are certain parameters, quite frankly, for the safety and well-being of those who wish to tour the border. So
but for a member of Congress that wants to go down, as I've done for the last 17 and a half years, we have to understand we assume the risk when we get there. So I'll make sure I have a recording of you indicating that it's okay for whomever has been given that kind of order. Now, we heard the chairman say the prior administration dismantled the immigration system. He said the prior administration did all they could to destroy the immigration system. He said they implemented a Muslim ban, and so we can set the record straight. And I know it's not intentional misleading, but even the courts have made clear there was no Muslim ban. Muslims were allowed in. There were specific countries that had extraordinary numbers of terrorists. Those were the countries where there was a ban. There was no Muslim ban. So when I do want to know, though, you say immigrants are placed in immigration proceedings, but you didn't say where they go during those proceedings. They remain in the United States. When you say somebody's placed in immigration proceedings, and then you further clarified that some are detained, if they're not detained, the vast majority go released around the country, correct?
No, quite a significant number are placed on alternatives to detention. We use the acronym ATD. There are different levels of alternatives to detention depending on the risk profile.
But you ship many of those people that are not detained in these other categories around the country, correct?
Yes, on alternatives to detention.
And that's one of the things you're looking to increase the money for, is to pay NGOs and to have your own folks who can help get those people shipped around the country, correct?
Congressman, if I can explain.
You have asked for an increase in that amount of money, correct?
Yes, we have.
And so I'm wanting to know, though, who makes the decision where these different bus loads, plane loads, train loads, who makes the decision where they are going to go in the country?
So, Congressman, there are different tiers of disposition depending on the risk profile.
I'm wanting to know who makes those determinations. I just want to know who makes the determination. I don't have time for filibustering.
No, Congressman, I'm trying to answer your question.
Yeah, who makes that determination in those categories?
Your Honor, that's my days as a prosecutor. Congressman, Immigration and Customs Enforcement makes a determination subject to an immigration court judge as to who is placed in
Who makes that decision in ICE?
The ICE personnel with expertise make a decision with respect to who should be detained.
Wow, it sounds like a star chamber. We don't get to know who is making the decision to send people to these neighborhoods. Well, I only got 27 seconds. Let me just say, as you know, Article 4, Section 4, says the federal government is going to keep the states free from invasion. That hadn't happened. You know, there was Pancho Villa's guys in 1916. They came in and killed 19 people in New Mexico. That was considered an invasion. We're losing 100,000 a year. What will be your response?
The time of the gentleman has expired.
When Texas repels the invasion.
The time of the gentleman has expired, Mr.
Sir, you allowed 2 minutes beyond your time limit to let the witness answer the question.
Let me explain exactly what I'm doing so everybody knows.
Okay.
Okay. If someone has asked a question before the clock expires, I let the witness answer it.
The majority of the question was asked.
If the witness is in the process of answering a question, I let him finish. You've heard me say the time of the gentleman or gentlelady has expired, the witness may answer the question.
Correct.
You weren't asking a question.
Yes, I was.
You were stating a fact. There was no question. What is the question in front of? So that's why I cut it off at that point. Mr. Cohen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Point of order, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, the gentleman will state his point of order.
The gentlelady from California, her question ended at 21 seconds in the red, and then he was allowed to answer. The witness was allowed to answer. Mr. Gohmert is correct. You allowed someone to ask a question into the red. 21 seconds by the gentlelady in California.
The gentlelady was in the course of asking a question, and I permit that, as I permitted on both sides of the aisle. The gentleman, Mr. Cohen.
Except here.
Mr. Cohen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, thank you for coming before us. I appreciate it. We've had other cabinet secretaries in the previous administration who refused to come before us.
Tom.
So I
This
appreciate
is
your being here.
ridiculous.
I'm very concerned with the situation in the Ukraine and with the refugees. And you may have answered this question. I'm doing 3 committees at once, so I've been in the back sometime. But what is being done to accommodate the Ukrainian refugees who might want to come to the United States? And I've seen stories on TV where they've gotten to the border in Mexico and they've maybe eventually gotten in, but they spent a long time there. So,
Congressman, there are 3 avenues to bring humanitarian relief to the Ukrainians under the direction of our president. One is, of course, the traditional refugee system, the refugee program, and we immediately deployed refugee affairs officers to the region to administer a request for refugee relief. In addition, the State Department issued new guidance with respect to the application for visas for temporary stays here in the United States in accordance with our legal immigration system. And third, we were very proud, under the President's direction, to launch this past Monday, Uniting for Ukraine, which is a program to provide humanitarian parole to Ukrainians seeking temporary relief here in the United States who have sponsors here.
I don't know if you had anything to do with this, but there were about 8 children and their parents who were brought to St. Jude Children's Research Hospital in Memphis for treatment. And if you did have something to do with it, thank you. And if you didn't, thanks to whoever did it.
Well, thank you very much for recognizing the extraordinary work of the people in the Department of Homeland Security who made that possible in collaboration with our great colleagues in the Department of State.
Thank you, sir. I visited with First Lady Biden when she came to Memphis, and she visited with the families. We didn't, but we were there. And St. Jude's very special to us, and it's free and serves those children, and thank you for getting them there. Afghan interpreters. I've got quite a few people in my district who went to Afghanistan. They had interpreters. They praised their work. Some of them have not gotten back over to this country, and they have sent me messages suggesting that there are many Afghans and interpreters in particular who are still in the queue to get here. Is there a big backlog, and what are we doing to get our friends who helped us there back to?
So, Congressman, as you well recognize, the heroic work of Operation Allies Welcome, which brought more than 73,000 Afghan nationals here to the United States in a matter of weeks. There remain individuals in Afghanistan who are seeking humanitarian relief, and there are those outside of Afghanistan doing the very same. And U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, with the Department of State, is working through those applications as swiftly as it can. And we ask you to understand that we are doing so with the greatest urgency in light of the urgent need for relief, but we are addressing an agency that was so incredibly under-resourced. We're building up those resources to be able to provide emergent relief, as you so correctly identify the need.
I believe one of my colleagues might have asked you about children being separated and maybe the lawsuit or what's gone on with the previous administration separated children from their parents at the border. What's going on with children and parents who come together, and are there many children coming on their own today?
We are, through the Family Reunification Task Force that the President directed, reuniting separated children with their parents. We are enabling them to reunite here in the United States. And what we do is we grant them humanitarian parole so that they have some level of stability for a 3-year period. And of course, that is renewable depending on the facts of the particular case. We have already reunited more than 200 separated families. We have 400 more in process, and our work will not be done until we reunite them all.
Thank you, sir. I looked at your biography in a little bit, and I saw you have Sephardic as well as Ashkenazi roots, as do I, and my Sephardic roots came from Turkey. So we both probably had our families get benefits from HIAS, and the HIAS is a great group that helps immigrants. Because of that and knowing that history, I feel an obligation, and I suspect you do too as well, to help others who need to immigrate and leave oppressive regimes are dangerous. So thank you for what you're doing, and I know you, coming from Cuba, it was important that you were allowed in the United States.
Thank you.
The time of the gentleman has
sir.
expired. Mr. Issa.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, I want to join with others in thanking you for the expedited work being done at the U.S.-Mexico border near San Diego, where 700 to 1,200 Ukrainians a day are being processed, and the coordination that your staff has done. There's no question at all. They've risen to the task, and I appreciate that.
Thank you, Congressman.
And I also want to thank you for the service that I know you've given as a U.S. Attorney in California. I am disappointed, and we're going to go over it at no surprise today, in your current performance. Your opening statement, you said, we inherited a broken system. I just want, if possible, a yes or no. When you said you inherited a broken system, was the system you say that was broken, did it represent less people coming over the border legally, illegally, and being admitted than today? Yes or no?
Yes. Yes.
So there were a lot less coming over.
The number of encounters has increased.
Okay, so the system that you're called broken was working relative to the Border Patrol not being swamped.
Oh, I wouldn't say that at all. And if I may, Congressman, when I refer to a broken system, a broken immigration system, I'm speaking of a broken system before the prior administration.
Okay, I'd be the first to say that since the 1990s, the system for legal immigration has needed reform, and it's overdue. But
that is correct, which is why
right, but there were no laws changed in 2004, 5, 6, 7, the many years leading up to the Biden administration, and yet we clearly have a huge influx of people, and your Border Patrol, to be specific, they said 18 months ago we were on the border, today we are on our back. That is from the Border Patrol, and I think it's extremely important. You said that the border is secure previously. I'm hoping you someday recant that. When you look at behind me, that was taken 4 or 5 days ago on a Codell, and that is the current border with the opening that your administration continues to leave in a fence where you've sold off the fence. Now, is that a secure border by any stretch of the imagination?
So, Congressman, if I can go back to an initial point that you made with respect to the broken immigration system, fundamentally what we need is legislation to fix it.
Mr. Secretary,
which is why I added.
Mr. Secretary,
No,
I have very limited time, and I want to hear your
Which
answers.
is why I added the word dismantled, which
Yeah.
is what the prior administration did.
But
with respect to the security of the border,
Mr. Secretary, I appreciate that you want us to legislate, as I do. But your job is to enforce the law as it is. Your Border Patrol's job is to deter and deny people's entrance unless they have a bona fide ability, and you're not doing that. So let me just go through a couple of quick questions. Your own Border Patrol, Chief, would you? Chief Ortiz had said, they've got me a muzzle on me. That is a quote I got from multiple Border Patrol agents of what he's saying. That muzzle appears to be telling us on Codells just how bad it is. Having said that, we saw it for ourselves. Mr. Secretary, I'm going to cut right to the chase. Title 42 is something that is being talked about a lot right now. When is Title 42 going to end?
the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention.
No, just a date. May 23rd?
The CDC said May 23rd.
When we were at the border a week ago, we saw that on your orders from Washington, but I have to presume they were yours, Title 42 has already ended. Your Border Patrol, your Customs people were ordered to, and they were bringing in every day as many as they could get from down in Mexico, Title 42 people that had been refused, and bringing them back in. When I asked the agent in charge, she told me that they were trying to clear the backlog completely by May 23rd. They didn't know if they were going to be able to. That is a clandestine ending of Title 42. Why did you do it?
I am not familiar with that, and that is factually incorrect.
Well, that is
not
a statement that multiple members here on the dais saw. The question is, will you come back and give us the details of who gave that order and when it began? We have been told and we have witnessed that going on at the U.S.-Mexico border. It is going on as we speak today. So would you agree to come back and give us the details of who gave that order and whether that order was lawful?
Time of the gentleman has expired. The witness may answer the question.
Congressman, I don't know to what order you are referring. There is no clearing of the backlog as you have framed it. What we did begin to do is begin to expand the use of expedited removal under Title VIII of the United States Code, which is an enforcement mechanism to expedite the removal of individuals who do not have a valid basis to remain in the United States.
Mr. Chairman, for the record, I'll be brief. Multiple members here on the dais were told by the agent in charge the time and place that they were bringing in these individuals who were in Mexico, were remaining in Mexico. They had been refused under Title 42. NGOs were coming, bringing them there.
Point of order, Mr. Chairman.
This
is the same side of the aisle that's complained. You've now had an extra minute, Mr. Issa, to make your point.
It's not a point of order. Finish quickly, please.
So very quickly, I just want to make sure the record, I understand that the Secretary may not know about it, but there were multiple members who were told this by a uniformed agent. I just want to make sure that was the record. I thank the gentleman.
Thank you. Mr. Johnson of Georgia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding this hearing, and welcome to the Judiciary Committee, Secretary Mayorkas. You know, I find it ironic that my colleagues on the other side of the aisle want to concentrate on the southern border while completely mischaracterizing and ignoring what's happening in the interior of our country by right-wing extremists propelled by the false rhetoric of the ex-president Donald Trump. Secretary Mayorkas, a June 2021 Brenner Center report detailed the onslaught of threats against election workers continuing to this day. According to the survey described in the report, 1 in 3 local election officials are concerned about facing harassment or pressure while on the job, and 1 in 6 local election officials have been threatened because of their job. In my own congressional district, election workers from local volunteers to senior administrators endured threats of violence after the 2020 election, threats of hanging, firing squads, torture, and bomb blasts. Mr. Secretary, the department issued a February 2022 bulletin warning that in upcoming elections, we should expect calls for violence to be directed at democratic institutions, political candidates, party offices, election events, and election workers. Isn't that correct?
Yes, it is, Congressman, and
do you stand by that bulletin?
The security of the election system is a core responsibility of the United States government, and we are extraordinarily proud in the department to play a leading role in advancing the security of the elections.
Well, let me ask you this, Mr. Secretary. As we speak, it's accurate to say that Americans are being radicalized in preparation for the upcoming 2022 elections. Isn't that correct?
Congressman, we are seeing
and my time is quite limited.
We are seeing a rise in misinformation and disinformation that is attempting to strike at the integrity of the election system and people's right to vote.
And we're seeing on social media posts calling election officials corrupt and calling for violence against candidates and election officials. Isn't that correct?
That is, Congressman, which is exactly why I addressed the secretaries of state throughout this country a few weeks ago to speak with them about the efforts that we are making to provide them with physical security, the resources and information they need to ensure the safety of the electoral system over which they preside.
And Mr. Secretary, mimicking false claims of ex-President Trump, we continue to see social media posts claiming, quote, if our election systems continue to be rigged and continue to be stolen, then it's going to lead to one place, and it's bloodshed, correct?
Congressman, we're very well of the spread of false narratives that have as one of their goals an effort to radicalize individuals to violence.
And as I understand online radicalization and how it works, Mr. Secretary, is it fair to say that believers of such disinformation could become lone wolves and take it upon themselves to act on these calls for violence against election workers?
That is a potential that we are guarding against materializing, Congressman. That is why we have so many different efforts underway to equip local communities to identify individuals who very well could be descending into violence by reason of ideologies of hate, false narratives, or other disinformation and misinformation propagated on social media and other platforms.
Well, I'm glad to know that the department is in touch with election officials to provide them with information about security, personal security, as well as election apparatus security, so as to protect the integrity of our upcoming elections. And thank you so much for your work. And with that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Mr. Biggs.
Thank you. You know, Mr. Secretary, Mr. Chairman, my constituents aren't worried so much about mean tweets as they're worried and concerned about the impacts of the crisis on the border. So, under your leadership, DHS issued guidance that included using, for CBP agents and officers to use gender-neutral language and politically correct pronouns. Is that true?
Did I issue a memorandum to that effect? Is that what you're
guidance.
asking?
Did you? DHS issued guidance.
I'm not sure what piece of guidance.
DHS.gov.
If I may, to what guidance you're referencing, but that does reflect the principles that we are proud to advance.
Okay, so you don't recall issuing the guidance. I'll send that into the record without objection. So
that objection.
You also ordered CBP and ICE to stop using the term alien, including scrubbing websites, guidance documents, and other materials. Is that true?
To be precise, unless the individuals are referencing the statutory language itself, we are using the term non-citizen to reflect the dignity of each individual.
Right, so I'll introduce 3 articles that support that statement as well. Did you tell the Conference of Mayors that unlawful presence in the United States will alone not be a basis for immigration enforcement actions?
The September 30th enforcement guidelines that I promulgated, Congressman, make a number of different statements with respect to 2 very core principles. Number 1 is the safe and effective use of limited resources.
Please hurry.
And the fact that many individuals who are unlawfully present in the United States have been contributing members to this country, and our resources should not be dedicated.
So are you denying that on
them.
January 20th, 2022, you told the U.S. Conference of Mayors the following, that unlawful, quote, unlawful presence in the United States will alone not be a basis for an immigration enforcement action?
I'm not denying that. What
Okay, great. Thank you.
I'm sharing with you, Congressman, is that
The rationale for it. Appreciate
that is drawn from my memorandum.
Right. So is it true that DHS has spent resources and time creating a strategic framework for addressing climate change, including the establishment of the Climate Change Professionals Program?
Yes, that is true, and we are addressing one of the most significant threats to the homeland.
And you've also...
We see that
Yes.
in the increasing frequency
Just
and
have
gravity.
a couple seconds, right?
Yes, we see that in
So
the
the question was
increasing
yes or no. I appreciate you answering the question. You said yes, you did. Next question.
We see that in
Did
the
you
increasing
issue
gravity and
Right,
frequency
I understand
of
that. That's your
natural
rationale, but you and I have had this discussion, okay? So did you also release the first ever equity action plan?
Yes, and very proudly so.
Great. So here's the deal, Mr. Secretary. Well, let me just ask you another question. I think this is an interesting question, too. Will you commit to oppose any form of amnesty or modification of legal status of those who are in this country illegally who have entered during your tenure?
Only Congress can provide legal status through the laws. We administer the laws.
Would you
Congress
oppose that?
passes.
We're not talking about who passes laws or not. We're just talking about your philosophy as the DHS Secretary. Would you support amnesty or modification of legal status?
Congressman, I fully support and have for many years legislative reform that once and
Okay.
for all fixes our broken immigration
So
system.
I'll take it that you won't make that statement. Now,
No, I actually will if you would allow me. And
we got just a few seconds, so speed it up, please.
and that involves a path to citizenship for those who have been in this country for many years, who've been contributing
Very good.
to
So
the
you
well-being of our country.
So the answer is you would support amnesty of some kind. So you said that that the border's closed and secure. You've said today you're following every law. You understand, don't you, that the law, Secure Fence Act of 2006, you're in total violation of that. Operational control. You don't have the border under operational control, do you? Section 2. What does it say? It says in this section, operational control means the prevention of all unlawful entries into the U.S., including entries by terrorists, etc. You're not preventing entries. You're fomenting entries. You're encouraging it. You're either accepting the Biden administration, and if that's the case, then you should be impeached. If you disagree with the Biden administration's program, you should resign. That's where we are.
Will the gentleman yield? Will the gentleman yield?
Mr. Deutsch.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, good morning. Thank you for being with us. Thank you for your thoughtful testimony. As you know, I wrote to the President last May. Representative Megan and I did at a time of then rising anti-Semitism in our country amidst a series of violent attacks last spring against the Jewish community and Jewish institutions. And when I wrote, I urged the administration to swiftly implement the COVID-19 Hate Crimes Act to help prosecute anti-Semitic hate crimes and also develop an interagency strategy to combat anti-Semitism and protect American Jews from those rising attacks. In the response that I received from you, I was glad to see that there are steps that have been taken over the last several months within existing DHS programs to counter domestic violent extremism, including anti-Jewish extremism. And I was encouraged by the prioritization of nonprofit security grant program investments. But, Mr. Secretary, the security grant program, as you know, can only go so far. Programs with a secondary or partial focus on anti-Semitism can only go so far. These attacks are occurring not only against institutions that fall under the security grant program purview, but against members of the Jewish community, against Jewish grocery stores, against Jewish homes and neighborhoods, and literally out in the general public. We already knew from the FBI that more than half of all religion-based hate crimes occur against Jews, but this week, the ADL published its audit, which showed us that in 2021, the year I wrote that letter, that it was the worst year for anti-Semitism ever recorded. Incidents were up over a third above 2020, with a total of 2,717 incidents, an average of 7 attacks per day. Jewish institutions covered by the security grant program saw a 60% increase in attacks, but perhaps most chilling is that there was a 167% increase in assaults against members of the Jewish community. And known white national extremists accounted for only 18% of that total. So while I am grateful, I appreciate the inclusion of anti-Semitism in your other domestic violence extremism programs and your strong support for the nonprofit security grant program, we know that we need to do more. And I would just like to take the opportunity while you're here to ask you about what your department can do to prioritize combating anti-Semitism, prosecuting anti-Semitic hate crimes, and how you might lead an interagency strategy to tackle this issue specifically.
Congressman, tragically, we are seeing a rise in hate crimes of all types against minority communities throughout this country. Not only anti-Semitism, but I spoke with the presidents of historically black colleges and universities a few weeks ago in response to a series of bomb threats against them. We are indeed assisting in the investigation of hate crimes and working very closely with the Department of Justice to bring the perpetrators of that heinous crime to justice. We are also, through our Centers for Prevention programs and partnership, resourcing local communities with funding to the best of our abilities as our grant programs permit, and critically with information and advice with respect to how they can harden their facilities without making them less welcoming. Schools, places of worship, different types of places of congregation. We would be proud to enhance our efforts in this regard, and I very much look forward to speaking with you and learning your ideas. And of course, I have been in touch with the president of the Anti-Defamation League, Jonathan Greenblatt, to discuss strategies.
Yep. Mr. Secretary, I would welcome the opportunity to work with the administration to help formulate a whole of government approach. When a community represents less than 2% of the American population, but is a significant majority of all of the religious-based hate crimes, and when people are being attacked on the street, being pulled out of their chairs in restaurants and pummeled, having fireworks shot at them as they walk down the street because they are identifiable as members of the Jewish community, then the protection of institutions is important, but it is the protection of lives that deserves, I would respectfully suggest, even greater attention, and I do look forward to working closely with you to help accomplish that. Thank you.
The time of the gentleman has expired. Mr. Gates.
1.2 million people are undetained, free, roaming about the country. They've gone before a judge. A judge has issued a final order of removal. How many ICE agents do you need to deport them?
Congressman, I think what we need is legislation to fix a broken immigration system. Because
you don't need legislation to overcome a final order of removal, right? Look, I get it. You want comprehensive immigration reform and a big amnesty thing. Very unlikely that's going to happen. So we have to operate under the laws that exist now. So under the laws that exist now, a judge has told 1.2 million people that they have no right to be here. Do you plan to remove those 1.2 million people?
Congressman, with the resources we have, and I would appreciate the opportunity to answer your question fully. With the resources we have to allocate those resources.
How much money do you need to deport all of them? How much money? How many agents? To deport the 1.2 million who a judge has said has no right to be here.
Congressman, there are a number of questions that your question raises with respect to whether all of those individuals actually have been given due process.
No, they have.
Yes,
these are the people who've had the due process, okay? And here's the point. You have no plan to remove them. You don't know how many ICE agents it would take, and you don't know how much money it would take, because you actually don't want to remove them. That's why you issued the September 30th guidance that says, well, you know, if you haven't committed a crime and you just came to our country illegally, we're not going to remove you. Isn't that your position?
No, it isn't, Congressman. Not at all.
Well, then what is your plan to remove the 1.2 million?
Let me, if I may.
Do you have one?
Yes, we do. If I may, Congressman, as a former prosecutor, let me ask you a question. If one has a finite amount of resources and one has a finite number of hours, and one has a choice of removing 20 shoplifters or 3 fugitive armed bank robbers, how would you spend your time?
Well, I know how you've spent yours. I know how you've spent yours by decreasing by 48% the number of criminals you arrest, by deporting 63% fewer convicted criminals. You have the lowest deportation rate in the history of the department, right?
Your data that you cite is misleading.
No, it's your data. This is actually what your own agency is reporting. So do you think that it just might be the case that one reason that we will encounter the highest number of illegal immigrations in our nation's history this month and next month, because everybody knows that even if they come here, even if they go through the removal procedures, even if a judge issues a final order, you still think there might be more due process, and you have no plan to remove them. And then when I ask you what the plan is, you say, oh, well, resources, I gotta make finite decisions. I go back to my first question. How many ICE agents to remove the 1.2 million?
Congressman, I'd be pleased to provide you with a resourcing data subsequent to this hearing, if I may.
And I think it's telling that I think it's telling that you got plans for pronouns and you got plans for misinformation. But when it comes to the plan to remove the people that have had due process, you don't have one at all. Now, 800,000 people have encountered your CBP agents, and those folks have been released into the country. Like, some of those people are going to commit crimes, aren't they?
Congressman, may I have a moment to answer your questions?
Will some of the 800,000 commit crimes, yes or no?
Undoubtedly.
Undoubtedly. And so the Americans who are the victims of the crimes for the people that you release in the country are collateral damage that you are willing to accept in order to have our border function as a turnstile. You're willing to accept that collateral damage.
Congressman, I couldn't disagree with you more. Let me give you, if I can, some data that will actually
more than the data. How about this?
Well,
how did it feel to you when you went to the border and the Border Patrol agents turned their back on you?
One Border Patrol agent turned his back on me, and I addressed that as
the
leader of the Department of Homeland Security. So if I can return to data, because I want to make sure that you have accurate information.
Everyone knows that you have more people coming in than ever, and you're removing fewer people than ever, and it's because you have no plan and because it's on purpose. See, I don't buy the theory that you don't know how to do this. I think you're actually a highly competent dude. But the reality is, your plan is to bring these people in and to send the message to the smugglers and the criminals that they will never have to leave. That's why your workforce turns their back on you. And you have tools that you could use to deport these people. You have facial recognition. You have flights going all over the country, dropping people off. And I think we ought to use the best tools in the country to find these folks, round them up like they were at the Capitol on January 6th, and deport every last one of them. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Ms. Bass.
Congressman, may I have a moment to answer a question?
No, he didn't ask a question. Ms. Bass.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Secretary. I want to especially point out your patience for putting up with all of the theatrics. I want to echo what Chairman Nadler has already stated about your efforts to reunify children with their families. The last administration's policy of state-sponsored abuse of children, I believe, will go down as one of the worst moments in our history. And the trauma inflicted on those who have been torn apart from their families will be lifelong. On that note, could you speak a little more about those children detained by DHS? I want to know in particular where some of the children were found, whether they were with family members. Do you know if any of the children were recovered from traffickers? I'd also like to know about the relationship with the domestic foster care system. How many of these children ended up in foster care? For those children who are in the process of being reunited with their family, I believe you said that there are about 500 more. I wanted to know what is the process? What do you think? Are you concerned that some of these children will not be able to be reunited with their families? And I know with the last administration, the families had to pay in order to have their children returned. I want to know if we are providing any assistance, especially to the families, to help them recover from the trauma of being separated. And then finally, in the past administration, administered or issued contracts so quickly, and we know that many of the facilities were subpar. We know that many of the children were abused, and I want to know if the Department of Homeland Security is pursuing any of this, and please take the rest of the time to answer all those questions.
Congresswoman, thank you so much for speaking of an effort that we're very proud to lead under the leadership of President Biden, I'm the chair of the Family Reunification Task Force. We already have reunified approximately 200 or more than 200 children who were cruelly separated from their parents under the prior administration's family separation policy. We have approximately 400 more children in process so that we can reunify them with their parents. We anticipate, or we estimate, I should say, a total of 1,000 families that remain to be reunited. We are, to the extent of our capabilities, providing resources to the families who are reunified here in the United States under our grant of humanitarian parole. I look forward to following up with you, Congresswoman, to identify how many of the children here in the United States were placed into foster care, and we are certainly very focused on the facilities in which children are sheltered. That is something within the province of the Department of Health and Human Services, and we have contributed resources to the department to advance the well-being of those children. This is an all-of-government effort under President Biden's direction, and each and every agency involved in this effort is extraordinarily proud to bring relief to these traumatized families.
Karen, your mic's off.
I'm sorry, for the families, for the children that have been reunited, do those families have to pay for their children? And then you feel free to take the rest of the time responding to the attacks from my colleague, Representative Gates.
Congresswoman, we do not impose financial fee to reunify families. We're trying to restore families that have suffered so very much. I want to just give, and thank you for the opportunity to give a few statistics. In fiscal year 2021, 12,025 individuals were arrested, were convicted of aggravated felonies, nearly double the number, 6,815 arrested in fiscal year 2020. Again, in fiscal year 2021, of the individuals removed, 46% of the removals were for people convicted of felonies or aggravated felonies, compared to 18% during the previous 4 years and 17% the year before that. This is what we call smart and effective law enforcement, to focus on those individuals who pose the greatest threat to public safety, national security, or border security. Thank you.
Thank you for your service.
The gentlelady yields back, I assume?
Yeah, I yield back. My time is up.
Gentlelady yields back, Mr. Bishop.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's useful to have a follow-up opportunity when seeking answers from you, Mr. Secretary. We were together yesterday when I was in Homeland Security, and Mr. Gates's question sort of put a fine point on something for me. I asked you yesterday about Americans who may be subject to crimes committed by the 836,000 that are released into the country, and what you'd have to say to them. And we went back and forth because I was having a hard time getting a straight answer, and ultimately you went back to what I hear you say a lot, that they've got the right to assert an asylum claim. But when you hear the real numbers and what Mr. Gates just asked you about, let's get the real numbers. There's 836,000 people released. There's 600,000, give or take, gotaways that Border Patrol knows they weren't able to capture because they're distracted by changing diapers and processing people. And then you've got 1.2 million people subject to an order of deportation who you're not removing. And as you said, undoubtedly, some of those 2.6 million people in the country, by your discretionary choice, will commit crimes. So I want to go back to the question I asked. Do you have anything to say to the American people, the victims of the crimes those people will commit, who are here by your discretion?
Congressman, we do not tolerate the commission of crimes in the United States. We have laws to address those crimes.
Is that what you intend to tell the people who've been subject to the victims, who are the victims of the crimes?
It is. I have worked with victims of crime for for more than 12 of my 20 years in government service. And so we do not tolerate the commission of crimes here in the United States against individuals present in the United States. It is not my discretionary choice. It is by operation of law, of the laws that the United States Congress has passed, that individuals who make a claim for asylum have a right to vindicate their
You're not
asylum
suggesting to this
claims
committee, are you, sir, that people who are subject to an order of detention cannot be removed by law? You're not suggesting that to this committee.
That is not what I said at all.
All right. And the people, the rest of the people who you released, not all those people are required to be released, are they? You could detain them.
Congressman, we are funded for a certain number
Your budget request reduces the amount of bed space you request to detain people. Isn't that right?
Yes, our fiscal year 2023 budget requests 25,000 detention beds. And the numbers, as you have readily identified, the number of detention beds over the last many years has not met the number of individuals who are in asylum proceedings. And
so you're reducing the ones you're requesting.
Detention is used, Congressman, detention is used to address the greatest public safety threats. In the criminal justice system, there is also detention is used before a trial reaches a final adjudication. Detention is used for two purposes. Number one, to protect the public safety if there is no condition or combination of conditions that can secure the public safety during the pendency of the criminal proceedings, and two, to ensure the individual's continued appearance in proceedings.
And the rest of the people who are committing crimes, the people who are subject, who suffer the victims of the crimes, are just left on their own. You have no answer for them. Let me ask you a question about security. I've given you a lot of time, Mr. Secretary, to go on. Let me ask you about security. You've said that DHS assesses that domestic violent extremists present the greatest risk to the homeland, and that struck me. I want to ask you this question. Are you including as domestic risk, domestic violent extremist risk, those 2.6 million people who are here by your discretion?
Congressman, my statement is that domestic violent extremism represents the greatest terrorism-related threat to the homeland.
How do you know that none of the 2.6 million, including the 600,000 gotaways, you don't even know who they are, and you know 41 on the terror watch list have been encountered? How do you know those people aren't a source of risk of terrorism?
Congressman, the individuals that we have encountered on the terrorism screening database, the TSDB.
You're not answering my question. Respectful, I've got 22 seconds. I'm going to pose one more question. You know Ramzi Youssef claimed asylum, right? And you know that he got to be released into the country on an assertion of credible fear. He was released, and 6 months later, he bombed the World Trade Center. Among the 600,000 gotaways, just that small portion, Mr. Secretary, how do you know that are you waiting for a mushroom cloud?
The time of the gentleman has expired. The witness may answer the question.
Mr. Chairman, I won't dignify that last question with a response.
The time of the gentleman has expired. Mr. Cicilline.
Mr. Secretary, thank you so much for being here. And just in case there's any mystery about why you're not being allowed to answer questions by my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, or why they're not interested in your reference to data or misleading statements or making statements which are inaccurate that you've corrected for them, well, it's actually, there's a plan about this. They're not actually interested in that because they have a 60-page memo prepared by the ranking member of this committee, as reported it in the newspaper. That's a memo that includes misleading and provocative talking points that seek to portray migrants and refugees as perpetrators of gruesome crimes. It's a confidential for internal use only document, and it's prepared so that the Republicans can argue that Democrats are seeking to, listen to this, abolish all immigration enforcement and even encourage illegal immigration. So don't be confused, with all due respect, Mr. Secretary, of your ongoing effort to actually put data and information for the committee. There's a whole plan about what this hearing's about, and it's about creating Fox News spots that they can use for politics. And I regret that you have to be part of it, but I'm grateful for your presence here today. And so I have three very specific questions. In addition to wanting to express my gratitude for all that you're doing, that video that was, again, designed to be scary showed you're preventing dangerous individuals from coming into the United States, arresting drug kingpins, seizing caches of drugs, and disrupting human trafficking. Sounds like you're doing exactly what we expect you and your department to do, and for that, we're grateful. First question is, there have been a number of very anti-LGBT laws passed around the country that have put families, and particularly parents, at risk. In Texas, for example, an executive order that demanded the investigation of parents for providing their trans children with health care, a position supported by every medical association. In response, the United States Air Force has announced it will provide legal, medical, and other resources to employees whose families are impacted by these anti-LGBTQ laws, including reassignments to other states if necessary. And my question, Mr. Secretary, is will you commit to providing similar resources to DHS employees whose families are impacted by these anti-LGBTQ laws?
Congressman, let me, if I can, make a very important statement. Diversity, equity, inclusion, opportunity is one of our core principles. It is one of our priorities for fiscal year 22 and beyond. We're investing in employee well-being and employee morale.
And thank you, and I hope you will look at the practices that the United States Air Force has adopted and consider doing exactly the same thing. Mr. Secretary, last week you announced a new streamlined process for Ukrainians to enter the United States through humanitarian parole and the refugee program, and of course this is very much needed. Can you discuss the actions you're taking in order to ensure that we reach this 100,000 number, and also what can Congress do to support it? And if you could do that quickly, I have one last question.
Very quickly, as I mentioned previously, we have the Uniting for Ukraine program, which is a humanitarian parole program. We've already received, I believe, more than 4,000 applications, and we launched the program on Monday. We also deployed our refugee affairs officers to the region to accept refugee applications, and so we are going full throttle to realize the President's commitment to provide refugee relief for 100,000 Ukrainians.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. And finally, our nation's refugee and asylum programs were once called by the evangelical leadership of this country as the crown jewel of America's humanitarian work. But as you know, Mr. Secretary, the prior administration, the Trump administration, dismantled our refugee admissions program and set historically low refugee admission goals. They decimated the capacity of refugee resettlement organizations and delayed the pipeline of refugees ready for processing in the United States. Fortunately, President Biden has begun to reverse that process. Can you discuss what your department is doing to increase our nation's ability to accept and resettle refugees? Why have the refugee admission numbers been so low even this year? And what can Congress do to support our refugee program to ensure that America continues to be the kind of crown jewel of the refugee and asylum program that other people around the world look to as an example of what a great humanitarian effort is?
Congressman, thank you so much for your interest in these critical programs, and we were and are so proud to once again lead the world in doing so. We are hiring personnel so that our personnel can administer applications for refugee status and can administer applications for asylum. And one of the requests in the President's fiscal year 2023 budget is to appropriate funds to U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services so that we can advance the recruitment and hiring efforts. We will, of course, promulgate a fee rule that will equip USCIS with additional resources to hire those personnel, which are so vital. The work they do is so incredibly noble.
Thank you so much, Mr. Secretary, and thank you for your service to our country. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Mr. Buck.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Mayorkas, Americans are mad, and they are particularly mad at you. In fact, even President Biden had to appoint the vice president to help you do your job. When I listen to constituents in my district, they believe you have intentionally made our border less secure. When I listen to my colleagues, they believe you have acted intentionally to make the border less secure. My constituents distinguish between your actions and the actions of other Biden administration officials. Americans are mad at Secretary Austin, for example, because he removed military personnel for not taking the COVID vaccine. Americans are mad that the Biden administration reduced oil and gas production, and we see the result at the pump. There are a number of bad policies from the Biden White House, but Americans believe what you've done is intentional. You've stopped the building of the wall that deterred illegal immigrants from coming to this country. You've terminated asylum cooperative agreements with Guatemala, El Salvador, and Nicaragua. You're trying to revoke Title 42. You are funding organizations that work in foreign countries to encourage illegal immigrants to come to America. The result is the largest increase in illegal immigration in the history of the United States. You've allowed thousands of pounds of fentanyl to come into this country. Fentanyl overdose is now the leading cause of death for adults between the ages of 18 and 45. You're responsible for thousands of young girls being forced into prostitution in this country. The Americans I speak to believe you have intentionally undermined the mission of the Department of Homeland Security, that mission being to ensure a safe, secure, and prosperous homeland.
To safeguard our people, our homeland, and our values.
There you go. American parents are frustrated that their kids can't get an education because half of the students in the elementary schools where their kids go are monolingual Spanish-speaking kids that require additional care, and that care is coming from their kids' classrooms. Americans are mad that their relatives with serious medical conditions are waiting in line at the emergency room, being used by illegal immigrants to treat common ailments. American workers are mad that their wages are being suppressed by the mass influx of laborers. Many of my constituents have asked me whether you will be impeached when Republicans gain control next year. They don't believe that you've committed a high crime, and they don't believe that you've committed a misdemeanor. My constituents want you impeached because they believe you've committed treason. They believe you're a traitor. They compare you to Benedict Arnold. You know, no parent with the last name Arnold names their kid Benedict. They wonder, what will the Mayorkas family do down the road? Secretary Mayorkas, I was at an event this past weekend, and a lady approached me and asked me if you felt any shame for what you've done to this country. My question for you, Secretary Mayorkas, is very simple. Would you please answer that lady's question? Are you ashamed for what you've done to this country?
Congressman, I have so much to say.
You got a minute and 17 seconds to say it.
In response to what you have just said, it is so profoundly offensive on so many different levels, in so many different regards. I won't ask you for an apology.
Don't.
I won't. But let me share with you just quite succinctly. I am incredibly proud of my service to this country. It is more than 20 years of service in the civilian corps, as a federal prosecutor, and as a member of the Department of Homeland Security. I am immensely proud to work alongside the selfless, dedicated, and talented 250,000 personnel of the Department of Homeland Security in the service of the American people, to secure our homeland, to secure them, and to secure our values. That is my response.
What do you say to the mothers of the children who have died from the fentanyl overdoses? What do you say to all the people out there who can't get an education because of what you've done with immigration in this country? You've secured the homeland. It's a farce. It's an absolute farce. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. Mr. Liu.
Thank you, Chairman Nadler. Thank you, Secretary Mayorkas, for your distinguished public service. An American president told the American people that all their problems were because of the southern border. Sounded just like my colleague from Colorado, that all your problems are because of the southern border. He railed against the border. He tried to close it. He talked about the drugs at the border. That American president was Richard Nixon. It's 1969, and he launched Operation Intercept to shut down virtually the southern border. And after 3 weeks, he gave up. He failed. His policies failed to stop the migrants coming to the United States. And so did the policies of every other president. President Ford, Carter, Reagan, George W. Bush, Clinton, George H.W. Bush, Obama, and Trump. In fact, under the Trump administration, migrant apprehensions increased to 851,000 in May of 2019, more than double the year before. 144,000 migrant encounters occurred in May of 2019. So my question to you is, it's true, isn't it, that the issues at the southern border have been there for more than half a century?
That is true, Congressman.
For my Republican colleagues to somehow say this is a new problem is just hogwash. So let's talk about one of the more ineffective solutions, which is the wall. The former president said Mexico would pay for the wall. Did Mexico pay for the wall?
No, it did not.
Okay. The southern border is approximately 1,933 miles long, is that correct?
Approximately, yes.
And in 4 years, all the former president managed to do was build approximately 455 miles, of which only 49 were in places where there weren't already physical barriers. Is that correct?
I'm not familiar, Congressman, with the precise amount of mileage that was built, but it certainly didn't expand the entire territory of the southern border, nor is it the most effective means of securing.
In fact, public reporting is that there has been over 3,000 times this wall was sawed by people trying to cross. Isn't that right?
I have read a report that estimates that number of attempted incursions.
And the overwhelming majority of this wall was built in places where there already was a previous physical barrier. Isn't that right?
I believe so, Congressman.
Thank you. And by my calculation, the former president in 4 years only built new barriers in 2.5% of our entire southern border. So let me just tell you a story about why I think every administration has had problems with migrant flow. A few weeks ago, I met with a Colombian refugee, and she left Colombia, and I asked why she left. She said narco traffickers killed her father. And the line I kept remembering was, she just wanted the body back. They just wanted her father's body so they could give him a proper burial. So her brother negotiated with these bad people to get the body. And when the brother showed up, they killed him. And then they went after her husband and killed her husband. And then she fled with her 3 children. If any of us were in that situation, we would flee too. Migrant flow is a very complicated issue. And to really solve this, you would need comprehensive immigration reform. And so let me ask you, do you agree that if we really want to solve the problems at the southern border, we would need comprehensive immigration reform?
We would, Congressman, need legislation indeed to fix what has long been a broken immigration system, not just with respect to the southern border, but in many, many regards.
I'm pleased that Bloomberg has reported that there is a bipartisan group of senators meeting, including Senator Tom Tillis and Democrats, talking about bipartisan legislation to try to address the real issues facing the southern border. So let me ask you, what would some of those pieces of legislation look like that you would like to see?
So there are many pieces that have been discussed and that I support. One, of course, fundamental, is a path to citizenship. We have approximately 11 to 12 million undocumented individuals here in the United States. Programs that recognize immigrants' contributions to the prosperity of our nation, to fix the path for farm workers to citizenship, to provide citizenship for the dreamers, the young children who really have known no other country but America, who've been on our front lines and contributed to our communities in so many different regards, whether it's in response to the COVID-19 pandemic, or have taught our children, or worked in our faith-based institutions to recognize the contributions of individuals who have made this country everything that it can and should be.
Thank you, and I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. Mr. Jordan.
Secretary, have you done anything right? When it comes to our border, have you done anything right? Record number last July, record number of illegal migrants coming into our country last July. That record was just broken last month, and next month you're going to make it worse. Agents turning their back on you when you speak. Agents on video on horseback patrol doing their job. Democrats call them racist. You guys throw them under the bus. Fentanyl coming across our border like we've never seen before. Are you doing anything right when it comes to the border?
Oh, Congressman, so you mentioned I've done a tremendous number of things correct, and of which I am very proud. And let me just pick up on one element of your question, and that's the element of fentanyl. Because the effort to smuggle fentanyl into our country actually comes through the ports of entry. And we have increased the interdiction of fentanyl by quite a significant amount. Through the devotion of technological resources and other.
I think there are lots of families who've been impacted by this drug who would have a different take on that, but we appreciate what you are doing at the ports of entry. That doesn't take into account what's happening outside the ports of entry. Let me just ask you this question, because this gets to the numbers and the records that you have broken month after month after month after month, 5 months in a row, and then, of course, that record was just broken last month. Do you think that maybe, just maybe, your actions and your policies are encouraging migrants to come to the border? Moratorium on deportations was announced on day one by President Biden. You've ended Remain in Mexico. You've ended agreements with Northern Triangle countries. You've stopped building the wall. And in 25 days, Title 42 goes away. Do you think that's encouraging people to come to the border?
Congressman, the increase at the border is the result of a number of factors, and it's a regional phenomenon.
Maybe a number of factors. I'm asking about those specific factors, your actions, your policies.
I do not. I think that individuals...
Come on. You went to Berkeley, you went to Loyola, you're no dummy. You understand, the folks I represent, good people, they understand that when you put those kind of policies in place, that encourages, incentivizes people to come. And I haven't even talked about the biggest incentive, Mr. Secretary. The biggest incentive for people to come is they know they're going to get released. You're going to let them go. Come to America illegally. There's no wall to stop you. We won't deport you. You won't have to stay in Mexico while we check you out, and you'll get released to wherever you want to go. We'll put you on a bus. We'll put you on a plane. Now, you may have to fly in the middle of the night because we don't want the American taxpayers who are paying for this. We don't want them to know where you're going and that we're doing this. And, of course, when they get there, I mean, this is just so common sense. Again, the folks I get the privilege of representing understand that. When they get there, you know what they're going to do? They're going to get on their phone. May not be the phone you gave them, but they're going to get on their phone, and they're going to call back home and they'll say, hey, come to America. Mayorkas is letting you in. They won't even call. They'll probably FaceTime. Hey, look, I made it. Show it around. That's what they're going to do. That's what your policies have incentivized. And the part that bugs me is that is so unfair to the American taxpayer and the American citizen. And maybe most importantly, Mr. Secretary, I think that's unfair to the people who came here legally, the immigrants who did it the right way. I think it's unfair to them. I think it's spitting in their face. Your policies are driving this influx we have seen, the record after record.
Ranking Member Jordan, can I answer your question?
So I just paused.
Because I want to speak of one success. But first, I'll return very quickly to the issue of fentanyl and opioid overdose deaths. In 2020, there were approximately 50% more opioid deaths in this country than over 2019. 2020 versus 2019. The scourge of illegal drugs in this country.
Let me ask you this, because you can. I mean, look. I want you to answer the question of your actions and your policies are driving and incentivizing people to come. People with common sense know that they are. Let me ask you this: do you think when you release 836,225 illegal immigrants into our country, do you think that is actually accomplishing the objective of the cartels? These people pay the cartels money to get here, pay them lots of money, for them lots of money, to get here, and then you're actually releasing them. Isn't that sort of accomplishing the objective of the cartels?
Congressman, those are individuals who have claimed asylum under our laws. Let me speak of one success, since I didn't have an opportunity to answer your question. In 2010, when I was in the Department of Homeland Security, I was told that one of the infirmities in our system is it takes 6 to 8 years between the time of encounter at the border and the time of a final adjudication of an asylum claim. That was in 2010. Nothing was done to address that until this administration. We promulgated—
As Mr. Gates pointed out, Mr. Secretary, 1.2 million of them went through that process. They're supposed to be removed, and you're not doing it.
We promulgated an asylum
and you're not doing it.
We promulgated an asylum officer rule that is taking effect at the end of May.
Let me ask you one last thing.
42
illegal immigrants were encountered at our border are on the terrorist and no-fly list. Are any of them still in our country?
Gentleman's time has expired.
This is an important question for this committee. Are any of them still in our country?
Congressman, I will deliver to you a response with respect to—
No. That's a simple question. Are terrorists, people on the terrorist watch list, no-fly list, are they still in the United States that you've encountered on the border?
Congressman, some of them may be still in detention. So I will—
Have any of them been released? Have any of them been released?
Time has expired.
This is critical for the—
recognizes—
You got 42. Have they been released? Will the gentleman answer that question?
Congressman, I will provide you with—
Thank you,
They
Madam
may have been
Chair. Thank you, Madam Chair. Ranking Member, I believe it is my time.
Madam Chair, if I could just 1 second. I'm
No,
sorry.
the gentleman's time has expired. Ms. Jayapal.
We want to know if people on the terrorist watch list, have any of them been released,
Mr.
and he won't answer that
Secretary,
question.
it is, Mr. Jordan, it is my time.
But this is about people.
It is my time.
That's a pretty important
time has
question. That's
expired.
a pretty important question.
Thank you.
I can't believe
Secretary
that the
Mayorkas.
majority doesn't want to know the answer to that
Ranking
question.
Member Jordan.
Madam Chair, point of order. Ms. Jayapal is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Secretary Mayorkas, thank you for your service to this country, and thank you for tolerating with such grace the outrageous attacks, including personal attacks, on your character. I want to make 3 points before I get to my questions for you. Number one, you were handed a broken system, further decimated by the Trump administration. A Trump strategy was systematically to eliminate all legal pathways to come to the United States. The misguided implementation of the Title 42 public health law to circumvent existing immigration law was part of that strategy. So was the horrific Trump separation of at least 5,500 children, 5,500 children from their parents, a trauma which they will likely never recover from. You are absolutely right, this is my second point, that what we need is a humane and just immigration system with legal ways for people to come, including upholding our obligations under international and domestic law for people to seek asylum. But our colleagues have no interest in getting such a system because it is actually too useful for Republicans to not have a functioning system because it allows them to attack and scapegoat immigrants even as they and all of America benefit from the labor and contributions of documented and undocumented immigrants to our country. I am a legal immigrant, and I have no problem with the fact that we need to reform our immigration laws. So let me get to my questions. Secretary Mayorkas, how does the previous administration's harm to the refugee system and attacks on legal immigration affect the people who are coming to the border?
Congresswoman, what we have done is shut down lawful pathways in the prior administration, and it drives people to seek the dangerous journey to arrive at our southern border and make a claim of asylum. That is why this administration is so focused on rebuilding safe, orderly, and humane pathways as our laws provide, so people do not have to take that perilous journey when they fear persecution by reason of their membership in a particular social group, which is how our refugee and asylum laws are built.
And can you just briefly talk about the administration's work to rebuild the refugee system and any other specific quick measures you want to mention that mitigate the numbers of people seeking protection at the border?
So there have been a number of efforts to dismantle our refugee system in the prior administration. Number one, of course, to decimate the agency that administers it with the Department of State, that's the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, and also to take down our international operations, which provide incredible services in furtherance of our refugee system. And so we have plans to rebuild our international operations, and as I have stated earlier in this hearing, Congresswoman, to hire our personnel that adjudicate refugee claims, screen people appropriately for their eligibility.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. One part of the problem is the capacity of our immigration agencies, as you said, to timely process benefits. Another is the law itself, which doesn't allow us to have immigration that meets our needs. And moreover, the only punishment for breaching immigration law is deportation. There is no middle ground. No matter your family ties, no matter the decades you've lived and worked in the United States, I have a resolution, Roadmap to Freedom resolution, that calls for us to adopt a compliance-based approach, similar to what we do in the tax law system, by implementing scalable immigration consequences that provide a way for people to come into compliance with the law. Do you think that such an approach warrants further investigation to encourage and facilitate compliance with immigration law?
Congresswoman, I would be pleased to review your proposal and to discuss it with you. We have to fix our broken immigration system, and as I have stated previously this morning, and for many years, it is broken in so many different regards.
Let me move to the detention system. If we had immigration laws to meet our needs and scalable consequences to give people opportunities to secure status, we wouldn't need enforcement and detention to the level we need them now. Right now, the immigration incarceration system allows private for-profit prison companies to pad their bottom line while subjecting people to horrific conditions that have led us to preventable deaths. Do you agree that immigration detention should not be driven by profit?
Congresswoman, I know that one of the President's commitments is to end the for-profit prison system in the immigration system. What I have done in the Department of Homeland Security is adhere to our standards of detention, to focus on those facilities that house people in substandard conditions or do not otherwise comply with the standards that have been in existence in the Department of Homeland Security for many years, from administration to administration. And so we will hold facilities accountable and those who operate them to make sure that they comply with the laws that we have imposed.
The gentlewoman's time has expired.
Madam Chair, I seek unanimous consent to enter into the record a 2021 article, 48 Hours of Border Chaos, inside a CBP crackdown on Iranian Americans, describing how the previous administration wrongfully detained hundreds of Iranian Americans at the northern border in Washington state for over 6 hours, including U.S. citizens and legal permanent residents. And I also seek unanimous consent to enter into the record a public health letter that was sent in May of 2020 from public health officials, dozens and dozens, opposing Title 42 and saying that the CDC at that time had based that order on specious justifications and failure to protect public health. Thank you, Madam Chair. I yield back.
The gentleman from Louisiana is recognized.
Thank you. I yield to Ms. Jordan.
Secretary, have any of the 42 illegal migrants on the terrorist watch list or no-fly list encountered on our southwest border been released into the United States?
Ranking Member Jordan, as I mentioned before, I will provide that data to you with respect to the disposition of each one. I do not know the answer to your question.
The Secretary of Homeland Security does not know the answer to the status of 42 individuals who came to our southern border illegally, are on the no-fly list and the terrorist watch list. You do not know whether they are been released or not into the country. That's your testimony.
Ranking Member Jordan, as I've said before, I will provide you the data. I
yield back to the gentleman. That's amazing.
Mr. Secretary, this is outrageous. At your oath of office ceremony on February 2, 2021, you said, quote, "The mission of the Department of Homeland Security is to safeguard the American people, our homeland, and our values." On the website of DHS, it describes the mission. It says the Department of Homeland Security secures the nation's air, land, and sea borders to prevent illegal activity and is focused on securing our borders and keeping our communities safe. Sir, you're the 7th Secretary of Homeland Security in charge of the 3rd largest federal department in the United States and the largest immigration system in the world.
You are given immense power and an absolutely critical responsibility. Of all of our federal agencies, sir, I think yours is the one that has the smallest margin of error. Because if the Secretary of Homeland Security is unable or unwilling to give these answers, to perform his duties and accomplish his mission, crime surges, chaos ensues, and innocent people die. And Mr. Mayorkas, that is exactly what is happening on your watch. All of us have been down to the border. We've seen this with our own eyes, and we are outraged. And so are our constituents and all law-abiding citizens in this country. They're outraged because of your deliberate and defiant policies. These are the documented facts. We have a literal invasion of lawless masses flooding over our border from more than 160 countries. The safety and security of the American people are being directly threatened, and innocent children, sir, are being abducted, assaulted, raped, and murdered by human traffickers. Countless numbers of known terrorists and vicious gang members are clearly coming across our border and making their way into our communities all over the country. The precious treasure of American taxpayers is being used to incentivize and reward all this because illegals are given food, clothing, health care, cell phones, welfare benefits, and we also, the taxpayers, pay for ghost flights and bus tickets so they can send them around and secretly transfer these folks into all of our communities across the country. It is your policies, and because of them, that our entire country is becoming a crime scene. And we are dealing with a humanitarian disaster that would have been unimaginable just 3 or 4 years ago. Because of your policies, the drug cartels are making billions of dollars and building their empires, and they are drowning our streets in fentanyl and other deadly substances, and that has made drug overdoses, as you know now, the #1 cause of death for Americans ages 18 to 45. Our brave Border Patrol and law enforcement agencies and officers are completely overwhelmed, and they are personally endangered. And the rule of law is being trampled underfoot, and the stability and the very sovereignty of our nation is being threatened like never before. I have a long list of questions I was anxious to ask you today, but I've been watching you. You know, you've been on Capitol Hill for 3 days now. You've been in 3 committees. You have an extraordinary talent, I think, for evading questions, and you've provided answers that are not accurate, and that's documented. You're insulting the intelligence of the American people, and you're subjecting them to extraordinary danger. This is not a game. It's been detailed over and over this week, and here again today. You have presided over the greatest immigration catastrophe in American history, and it's an objective truth that you have helped design and implement this system. You took your oath of office in February last year, and by the end of the first year, ICE recorded the highest number of border crossings and the lowest number of deportations in history. Fact. You have stated publicly in direct defiance of our laws that, quote, being here illegally by itself is not enough to be removed, unquote. If DHS does not deport illegals, that is, apprehend and quickly remove people who cross into our country illegally, then we have no border security at all. We all know that after Title 42 is repealed, 18,000 immigrants a day are going to result coming over that border. It's going to be a total collapse of operational control. If people are allowed to simply walk in here and live and work and collect taxpayer-funded benefits and assistance for years upon years and maybe permanently, then in a very short period of time, we'll be totally overwhelmed. We'll be crushed by the sheer numbers and the weight of illegal immigration, and there will no longer be any border, any security here, any sovereignty at all. We won't have a country. I called for your resignation in July of last year and explained then that it had already become crystal clear that you were either unable or unwilling to do your job. But as has been said here today now, based upon the facts and the evidence, we've concluded you're doing this intentionally. It is despicable. I believe these are impeachable offenses, and Mr. Secretary, my advice to you is to begin your search for a different career field very soon, because there will be an election, and the American people will let their voices be heard on this, and we will be taking the majority. I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record a letter from 133 members of Congress to the Secretary expressing our concern that his actions in opening our border and inaction in enforcing our laws are endangering American lives.
Without objection, and the time of the gentleman has expired, Mr. Swalwell.
Thank you, Chairman, and welcome, Secretary. Welcome back. You were here on the Hill testifying yesterday. And, you know, look, I think you have seen over the past few days that my Republican colleagues have zero interest in border security. They have high interest in border theater and politics. These guys, if you want a dog to bark at cars that drive by in front of your house, they would be great at that. You should hire them to do that. I would never hire them to solve a problem. They're not interested in solving problems. In 2014, the United States Senate was very interested. Republicans and Democrats, Republicans like Lindsey Graham and Marco Rubio, came together, 68 of them, to pass a bipartisan comprehensive immigration plan that would put 20,000 new border agents on the border. These guys, Kevin McCarthy's crew, they blocked it from getting a vote in Congress. What would it mean to you today, Secretary, if you had 20,000 additional border agents on the border rather than a border plan that was defunded?
It would, Congressman, help us advance our mission.
How would it help you advance your mission?
Congressman, there are two elements that fundamentally help us advance our mission with respect to security at the border. Number one, of course, is our dedicated personnel. First and foremost, our dedicated, talented, selfless personnel who sacrifice so much each and every day. The second is technology, innovation. That is the greatest force multiplier, not just for us on the border, the Department of Homeland Security, but I've heard that from law enforcement officers in communities across the country. And I think those are two very important elements that advance the security mission.
And can you tell us about your respect for the border agents? And if you know, I'm sure many of them are watching right now. What would you want to tell them?
I'm extraordinarily proud to support them, extraordinarily proud to be in the Department of Homeland Security with them. These are individuals that every single day don a uniform, and I say this to law enforcement across this country. Don a uniform, pin a badge on that uniform, and holster a firearm to protect others. They're willing to make the greatest sacrifices in the service of other people. Shifting gears to cyber threats, would you agree that China is probably the greatest cyber actor and threat as far as economic espionage, cyber espionage, and just stealing, cheating, manipulating? I think, Congressman, that China is one of the leading adversaries in this space. I think that Dmitry Alperovich, a thought leader in cybersecurity and other domains, said it very aptly. We don't necessarily have a cybersecurity problem. We have a China, Russia, Iran problem. We cannot divorce the cybersecurity problem from the geopolitical challenges that we in this country face.
Would you have any concerns about legislation that would require U.S. software and device makers to put on their platforms, require them to sideload or include through interoperability requirements Chinese apps?
Congressman, I'm familiar with some legislative action in this area, and I am reviewing it. I know that it rests in other parts of the federal government, and I'd look forward to discussing that with you.
Secretary, I have a number of smaller civilian airports or non-commercial airports in my district, and we have a tech and biotech industry that continues to create jobs in my district, and a number of those companies are flying overseas to conduct business and then returning to my district, but they are not able to land at the airports in my district because there's no customs presence. Those airports have offered to pay to have customs officers there through a program that CBP has, but have been told that they cannot do that. And I was just hoping we could continue to work with you, and we have worked with your staff to try and make sure that that's possible, because that is jobs and investment. But if those flights have to go to San Francisco or Oakland Airport, it just reduces the likelihood that they would invest because of an inconvenience.
Congressman, I'm aware of the challenge, and it's not restricted to your jurisdiction. In California, I know that there are other small jurisdictions that have airports similarly situated. I'd be very pleased to address that with you.
Thank you so much, Secretary. And you should be very proud of your last name, and I know everyone in your family will too.
Thank you, Congressman.
The gentleman yields back, Mr. Stubbe.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In May of last year at a Senate committee hearing, you stated that white supremacy was, and I quote, the greatest threat, I'm over here,
thank
the
you,
greatest
Congressman.
threat to the homeland. Earlier this month, you doubled down and again claimed that, and I quote, domestic violent extremism was the biggest threat. When you say that term, do you include in that term Black Lives Matter and Antifa?
Congressman, let me be precise, because you're not quoting me accurately, and precision is
I watched the video, I am.
Domestic violent extremism is the greatest terrorism-related threat.
Okay, so the greatest terrorism threat, do you include Black Lives Matter and Antifa in that definition?
Congressman, I do not consider Black Lives Matter.
So the riots that we saw over the summer of 2020 and the killing of David Dorn by an Antifa member, that wasn't domestic terror?
Congressman, it is not in my province to address a particular case.
Okay, well, what about the
But
riots at the Department of the Interior right here in Washington, D.C. by a leftist environmental group? Would you term that domestic terrorism?
Congressman, I leave it to the Department of Justice to define domestic terrorism with respect to particular incidents.
Well, you're the Department of Homeland Security, and you're saying that this is the #1 threat to the homeland. So I'm trying to get an understanding of, obviously now, based on your testimony, you don't include leftist radicalized groups, only white nationalists and right radicalized groups. Meanwhile, Customs and Border Protection have had over 2.4 million interactions with illegal immigrants at the border since the Biden administration took office, with an estimated 600,000 more illegal immigrants making their way into our country undetected. So using your definition that we just flushed out here, how many cases involving white supremacists and domestic terrorists have you referred to DOJ for prosecution?
Congressman, let me...
do you not have the number? It's a simple number.
You've made some profoundly inaccurate statements that I would like the opportunity to correct.
I'm specifically asking you a question. You just clarified. Domestic terrorism is a threat to the homeland, #1 threat. And I'm asking you, how many referrals from Homeland Security have you made to DOJ for white supremacy or domestic terrorism?
Congressman, I will provide you with that information.
So you don't know?
Subsequent to this hearing. I do not have.
Can you name one case?
That statistic.
Can you name one case of a referral from DHS to DOJ for domestic terrorism?
Congressman, I will provide the data to you.
I'm asking you can't name one case.
And let me just say.
Okay, so you can't name one case yet. According to a new report from the U.S. Department of Justice, almost half of all the criminals prosecuted in federal courts in 2018 were aliens, charged with crimes ranging from drug trafficking to murder and to kidnapping, and the vast majority, 38,000, were illegal immigrants, illegal aliens. But it's still, domestic terrorism is the #1 cause of your concerns. Texas is one of the only border states that keeps detailed statistics on crimes committed by aliens specifically. The latest report from the state of Texas reports that between June 1st of 2011 and November 30th of 2021, 356,000 criminal aliens were booked into Texas jails, of which 243,000 were identified as being in the country illegally. Those illegal aliens were charged with more than 401,000 criminal offenses, including 742 murders, 47,000 assaults, 7,500 burglaries, and over 11,000 sexual assaults and other sex crimes, and that is just in the state of Texas, and you can't name one referral that DHS has made on a domestic terrorism charge to the DOJ with all of those numbers. Just in April, in a 24-hour period of time, CBP arrested at least 5 gang members who illegally crossed the border. And it's been touched on in this committee about fentanyl. I come from Florida, I hail from Florida, I represent Florida, and fentanyl is a large problem in the state of Florida. And now we are at the point where fentanyl is the #1 cause of death of Americans between the ages of 18 and 45. Do you agree with that statement? That fentanyl is the #1 cause of death between the ages of 18 and 45 for Americans.
I'm aware of that statistic, and it is a tremendous threat
so that's
to the well-being.
And therefore, since it's the leading cause of death, you have, this is just what you've captured at the border. More fentanyl to kill every American has been seized at the border, and you say it just comes in through ports of entry. And so if we're only seizing that at ports of entry or other places you guys are capturing it, just like there's 600,000 got away illegal immigrants, there's got to be a tremendous amount of fentanyl that's coming in through the southern border that you guys are not stopping, that has now leading cause of death.
The time of the gentleman
in America.
Time of the gentleman has expired. Ms. Demings.
Mr. Chairman,
thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, thank you. Thank you for your service. Thank you for your endurance. Thank you for your tolerance. Increase in domestic terrorism attacks against religious institutions, bomb threats, and other threats against America's children at historically black colleges and universities, victims of severe storms still waiting for assistance, the need for more resources at the border. Mr. Secretary, unlike my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, I'm actually concerned about all of it. I'm upset about all of it. I don't just pick and choose winners and losers based on the politics of the day. All of the things on the list that I just mentioned, we all need to be concerned and need to come together to address them. When there's a lot of talk about the border, I was looking at something in 1970 where it was determined the nation's immigration policy was in disarray. That is the word that they use. So today's problem is not new, but the political games that I think that we are experiencing have taken a new low. It took 60 pages, 60, to basically give instructions that we don't really want to do anything. Mr. Secretary, I know you know, as a former police chief, I do want to hold people accountable who break the law, but I want to hold them accountable at the border. I want to hold them accountable on our streets. I want to hold them accountable if they exist in this body. There's been a lot of talk about protecting the American people. That is our primary responsibility, but in this document, I only see the American people addressed one time. Mr. Secretary, the sky would be the limit. We could do great things on behalf of protecting the American people if this body would take 1 minute to get its act together. And that is my prayer for the time that I am here, is that this body will live up to its oath and its responsibility and get its act together, because one day of theater has not protected, not one American citizen. So, Mr. Secretary, I want to talk about an issue that is very important, in addition to a lot of others to my constituents, and that involves USCIS and the processing of applications. I get calls from constituents, from people in my district daily, about how long it takes for them to receive their employment authorization documents. And just for the sake of the people on the other side of the aisle, let me just make this clear, that these are people who are here legally, have followed all the rules, and still suffer because of a failure to process their applications in a timely manner. So, Mr. Secretary, could you please let us know what the department is doing to address these significant delays in processing these employment applications?
Congresswoman, thank you very much. U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, as I've mentioned earlier, was on the brink of bankruptcy. And the personnel of that agency are actually doing heroic work despite a significant backlog created by what occurred in the prior administration. And what we are focused on is resourcing that agency with personnel so that we can work through the backlog and address the benefits for which people have applied, and if eligible, to which they are entitled. And funding is a critical component of our ability to resource the agency, which is why we are working as quickly as possible to issue a new fee rule that will recalibrate the fee applications according to the costs associated with them. That is the way we will fund that agency primarily, and the President's budget for fiscal year 2023 also requests appropriated funds for certain positions so that we can address certain responsibilities in the jurisdiction of that agency.
Could you talk a little bit about staffing for processing those applications? How are your staff increased?
The time of the gentlelady has expired. The witness can answer the question.
So we need to increase that staffing significantly, Congresswoman, and I can provide you with specific data. Depending on the particular immigration benefit category, we've calibrated the needs.
I would like that. Thank you so much, Mr. Secretary.
The gentlelady yields back. Mr. Roy.
Thank you, Chairman. Mr. Secretary, there have been over 1 million plus individuals put into proceedings or released into the United States on your watch. I've asked multiple Border Patrol personnel, not the union, mind you, if we double, triple, quadruple the CBP budget, would that 1 million release go down? And they categorically said no, it would go up. Do you agree, yes or no?
I'm not sure I understand your question, Congressman. With the addition...
With the number of people being released in the United States under current law, would it go down no matter how much you increased your budget? And it would not, as they said. Do you agree, yes or no?
Congressman, if I understand your question correctly, when individuals are in the United States and they make a claim for asylum...
So the number would not go down is the answer, right? Yes or no? That's what they said, and I think you just answered it. It would not go down. The only plan that you offer, the plan you just offered, is to process aliens faster and encourage more to come. We know that to be true. I know it's true. You know it's true. Cartels know it's true, and people around the world know it's true, and that's why people are coming.
That is false.
The secure, it's not false.
Yes, it
The
is.
entirety of your plan says that. The Secure Fence Act of 2006 says what? That the Secretary of Homeland Security shall take all actions the Secretary determines necessary to achieve and maintain operational control over the entire international land and maritime borders. Will you testify under oath right now? Do we have operational control, yes or no?
Yes, we do. And
we have operational control of the borders.
Yes, we do. And Congressman, we are working to...
Listen what operational control defined. In this section, the term operational control means the prevention of all unlawful entries into the United States, including entries by terrorists, other unlawful aliens, instruments of terrorism, narcotics, and other contraband. Do you stand behind your testimony that we have operational control in light of this definition?
I do. And Congressman, I think the Secretary of Homeland Security would have said the same thing in 2020 and in 2019.
No, the Secretary would have at least had a basis for saying that we have some sort of control of the border, but the fact is we currently have people flowing across the border, including dangerous narcotics and dangerous members of terrorists, which your own agency sent a letter to my office after 8 months. We sent a letter saying there are 42 people on the terrorist watch list that are in the United States, which you just said to Mr. Jordan, you don't even know where the hell they are. And that's what you're saying is operational control, including entries by terrorists and unlawful aliens? It's not. It's not operational control. Mr. Secretary, let me ask you a question. When we're looking ahead and we're talking about asylum, okay? Here, if the officer determines at the time of the interview that an alien has a credible fear of persecution, the alien shall be detained for further consideration. Mandatory detention. Any alien subject to the procedure under this clause shall be detained, pending a final determination of credible fear of persecution. Is everyone being detained? Yes or no?
No, and as a matter of fact, Congressman, that is an issue that is before the United States Supreme Court. And
the fact of the matter is our law says they should be detained, and your agency is releasing people on purpose in order to flood the zone and make sure that more people can come to the United States. And you use parole to do it. Parole of aliens within the following groups have been detained. Come down here on a case-by-case basis for urgent humanitarian reasons or significant public benefit. Yet your office is using parole. But when you use parole, the fact is they're not showing back up to ICE. Your own letter to Senator Johnson, to this committee, have acknowledged they're not showing back up to ICE. How can you be saying that you have operational control or that we're securing the United States when they're not showing back up?
Congressman, are you actually interested in the facts and the law?
Yeah, I'm reading you the law, and I'm actually talking to you about the facts about who's into this country.
Actually, you're
now let's actually go to something that's
Chairman, can the witness be allowed to answer the question?
Well, there wasn't a question there to be answered.
Gentleman's time.
Point. Now let's talk about the damage being done to the United States of America. Mr. Secretary, do you know what this is? This is a mobile morgue, a body trailer, needed by counties in South Texas overwhelmed by dead migrants. That particular trailer is filled with these bodies, 27 bodies that were stored in this mobile morgue in South Texas with dead bodies of migrants. Dead bodies like this one found on a ranch just 3 weeks ago in South Texas. A dead migrant. Somehow that's compassion. How about the dead bodies found by migrants? Compassion. How about the ranchers who had to walk out of their door, and this is what they faced. Gentlemen with rocks threatening a rancher in South Texas, only able to be saved when they were able to bring their dogs out to scare the people away in order to save themselves. Or the fact that you've got houses being attacked, you've got livestock dead on the side because we've got ranches wide open. How about the little girl here with a brand on her arm? A little girl with a brand on her arm because of your policies. A little girl here in the desert found by ranchers trying to save their life. And how about the lost voices for people dying from fentanyl? The tens of thousands of Americans dying from fentanyl. Faces of Americans
faces of Americans across this country dying because of fentanyl pouring into our country.
Time of the gentleman has expired.
You know full well.
Time of the
encouraging
gentleman has
cartels,
expired, Ms.
encouraging people to come here, harming Texas and harming this country. You know it. And you're ignoring
The time
actual
of
truth.
the gentleman has expired. He no longer has time to slander the secretary. Ms.
Not
Scanlon.
slander. You know what slander is?
Thank you, Secretary
Ms.
Mayorkas.
Scanlon. Ms. Scanlon.
Thank you, Secretary
There's no response to any
Mayorkas.
of it.
Over here. Thank you for being here today to address the many issues under your jurisdiction, including the important task of how we can ensure our national security while honoring our legal and humanitarian obligations. I appreciate you coming here prepared with facts and plans to help us do that job. And I'm sorry that so much of this hearing has been wasted with political grandstanding and disinformation. As others have remarked, from its earliest days, ours has been a nation of immigrants, home to those fleeing poverty, persecution, and war. I'm incredibly proud of the diversity of my district in Pennsylvania and the generations of Americans who welcomed immigrants into our country. But our nation also has a history of political opportunists who attack the latest wave of immigrants and seek to stoke fear and chaos in order to gain or cling to power. Whether those attacks were made against my ancestors, the Irish, yours, Secretary, from Cuba, those coming to our southern border today, or so many other groups in between, we've heard the same language and scare tactics. But then and now, those attacks are a sham, vile attention-seeking to divide and distract us from their proponents' lack of seriousness, their lack of solutions, and even at times, their own misconduct. I do want to echo several of my colleagues in thanking you for your efforts to reunite children who were separated from their families at the border under the last administration. Like you, I've met with children who were separated from their parents and seen the lasting trauma that caused. As a mother, it made me weep. It still makes me weep. As a patriot, it makes me sick to think that our country played any role in the immoral and heartless decision to rip children from their mother's arms for purely political purposes, with no interest in how that action would traumatize those children and no plan to ever reunite them with their families. So I appreciate your efforts in that behalf. I also would like to turn to an issue of immediate concern in my district. The city of Philadelphia was the primary point of entry to welcome thousands of our Afghan allies who fled their homeland after the fall of that government last summer, and hundreds are attempting to settle in our region. The fact that we anticipate a wave of Ukrainian refugees coming to our region as well adds some urgency to the need to address issues in the resettlement process. One of the greatest danger points for our Afghan allies is that family members who remain in Afghanistan are targets for the Taliban. Many family members of Afghans living in the U.S. have filed for immigration parole so their family members could join them here. Unfortunately, we've seen the backlogs in that process, and I understand there are nearly 40,000 parole applications awaiting adjudication. So what can DHS do to reduce the backlog for those applications, and how can it manage that backlog while also addressing the needs of the Ukrainian refugees we anticipate?
Congresswoman, thank you very much for your statements that precede your question and for your question which focuses on a very vulnerable population of individuals. So we have sought to prioritize to the best of our abilities the applications of individuals who are in Afghanistan who seek humanitarian parole. We have dedicated personnel to that effort. We're very aware of what the delays are, and we're trying to work as best we can with the limited resources that we have to work through that group of people and that critical body of applications, understanding the urgency. I must say that the personnel of USCIS are just doing extraordinary work, meeting the moment in a number of different regards, given the situation in different parts of the world.
Thank you for that. And we have worked with USCIS people in our region, and we know that they are working really hard. I am concerned about reports that Afghans are nervous about affirmatively applying for asylum And according to immigration advocacy groups, there's not sufficient legal assistance to help them. We know how complicated immigration law is. Many of our colleagues have trouble understanding it, and it's particularly difficult if you're coming from another culture and speaking another language. So what can DHS do to ensure that our Afghan allies are able to navigate our system?
So we've done a number of regards, Congresswoman, in that regard. First of all, we have worked with organizations to make sure that we are matching the individuals who might not otherwise know how to seek relief, to be able to educate them on how they can. Individuals already present here in the United States who have become naturalized, who have the cultural sensitivity and the understanding and the language capacity to match them with the individuals seeking relief. We've also worked with law firms to be able to provide pro bono assistance so individuals can access the humanitarian pathways that our laws provide. We're trying a number of different ways in which to match individuals' needs with the resources that are already resident here in the United States.
Thank you. I see my time has expired, and I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Mr. Owens.
Thank you, Chairman Nadler and Ranking Member Jordan. Mr. Secretary, about a year ago, I visited the border town of McAllen, Texas, and what I saw was devastating. There was overcrowded facilities, families, and unaccompanied children gathering under a bridge to be processed. Within hours, these illegal immigrants with taxpayer dollars were put on a bus or a plane to travel to the interior of our country. It was unlike any humanitarian crisis I've ever seen in my lifetime. My Republican colleagues and I spoke with Border Patrol agents who were overworked and overwhelmed. Days before our arrival, there was a surge of unaccompanied children, alone, confused, and helpless. They were sitting on the floor in this facility looking at these adult strangers with no idea what to expect next. There were about 250 children packed in rooms designed to accommodate 40. I'll never forget a little 7-year-old little girl, that was by herself without siblings, mother, or father. She was autistic, alone and afraid, and could not communicate anything about her family with authorities. She represents the 40,000 unaccompanied children that have been trafficked through our borders under your watch since last November. I noticed her because every time I looked over in her direction, she had tears in her eyes. The agents told me that she'd been crying for days and could not stop. We'll never know if she was stolen from her parents or abused by cartel perpetrators. It's become obvious to me that DHS doesn't know and doesn't care. In another committee meeting yesterday, it was pointed out that some of these children were used over and over again by the cartel, taken back and forth like cattle. By the way, the reported cost for these children, each child is $5,000. If that's not slavery today, I don't know what is. You visited the border a few weeks after we had, and had a polar opposite experience. As a camera crew followed you through an orderly and empty facility, you explained to the American people that you had successfully closed the border. You didn't see the little 7-year-old child because these children had been moved to another facility, out of sight, out of mind, on the same property. I love our country because of the good people who live here. Our American culture is one of compassion and empathy. We serve, protect, and provide for our most vulnerable. It is within our DNA, if we see human suffering, that we act, especially when it comes to our children. Mr. Secretary, over the last year, you have failed to act. Over the last year, you have overseen the dismantling of our border, the villainization of our border agents, and have purposely refused to enforce U.S. immigration laws. You did not inherit this. You created this. Under your watch, the Mexican cartel is now earning about $6 billion a year. $6 billion a year as they profit from human trafficking and child exploitation, as they rape women and girls on their trek to our southern border, as they smuggle Chinese-sourced fentanyl into our country. Last year, we lost over 100,000 Americans to fentanyl. After 20 years in Vietnam, our American body count was 60,000. I'd like to share some quick feedback from our constituents from Utah's 4th District, and I quote, "The Mexican cartel seems to be in charge of our border and who crosses it. Removing Title 42 is wrong, reckless, and plain stupid. The Biden administration has shirked their responsibilities to control the illegal immigrants on our southern border. Mr. Secretary, we look back on our history and we see the stain of human labor and sex trafficking. We called it slavery, which survived as long as it did only because government bureaucrats chose to close their eyes to this evil. Profit and power were prioritized over compassion and empathy. We're living Groundhog Day 2022 today. I encourage you to change courses to end your empathy-free open border policies. If not, I promise you, American history will not treat you kindly. Thank you, and I'd like to yield the remainder of my time to Ranking Member Jordan.
Thank you. Mr. Secretary, yesterday you announced the formation of Disinformation Governance Board at DHS. You put out a bulletin 2 months ago, big fancy bulletin here, red, white, and blue. You said that misleading narratives, dis and malinformation, MDM as you call it, misleading narratives undermine the trust in government. I was just wondering, when the head of the CDC, Ms. Walensky, said that the vaccinated can't get the virus, did that undermine trust in government? When the highest paid official in our government, the smartest man on the planet, Dr. Fauci, when he said the virus didn't come from a lab, did that undermine trust in government? And will that be something that this governing board will look at? How about this one? How about when 51 former Intel officials told us that the Hunter Biden story had all the earmarks of Russian misinformation? Will that be something that this governance board that you just formed, will you be looking into that?
Congressman, the Disinformation Board addresses disinformation that imperils the safety and security of our homeland. And one of the primary areas that we are focused on is the dissemination of disinformation and its potential connectivity.
But that's not what your bulletin talked about. It talked about COVID. It talked about COVID.
The gentleman's time has expired. I am permitting the witness to answer the question, but the gentleman can say nothing now. It's witnesses'
let me know when
privilege to answer the gentleman's question.
Yeah.
And
Continue your answer.
And its connectivity to violence. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman's time has expired. Mr. Correa.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, welcome again. You're a refugee from Cuba. My grandparents are essentially immigrants from Mexico. And as I look around this room, I would say probably everybody here is the descendant of a refugee, an immigrant, economic or otherwise. There's a lot of violence around the world right now, Mr. Secretary, a lot of wars. I also recently had the opportunity to travel to the border, this time to San Isidro, but this time to look and observe what's going on with the Ukrainian refugees from the Russian-Ukrainian war. There's about 1,000 refugees from Ukraine reaching Tijuana on a daily basis, 1,000. We've allocated 100,000 temporary protective status tickets, those golden tickets, to get into the U.S. under TPS. The UN report, yesterday the UN reported an estimated 8 million Ukrainian refugees expected to leave Ukraine this year alone. I bet that 100,000 cap, TPS, is going to be hit pretty quickly. Mr. Secretary, what do we do when 100,000 Ukrainian refugees are admitted into this country? Are we going to blow through that cap, or can we give them more admissions to the U.S.?
Congressman, let me first, if I can, make sure that the language we use is precise. Temporary protected status, or TPS, applies to those Ukrainians who are already resident in the United States. What we are speaking of when we are speaking of bringing 100,000 Ukrainians who have fled their brutally attacked nation, we are speaking of the refugee program, we are speaking of the grant of humanitarian parole, and we are also speaking of the visa programs that the Department of State administers. The President has committed to bringing 100,000 Ukrainians to relief here in the United States. There will be others, in addition, who could be eligible for relief under the grant of humanitarian parole, which is judged on an individualized case-by-case basis.
Mr. Secretary, you proposed that the prior administration effectively dismantled the refugee program. Is that essentially what happened?
That is true, and if I had 20 seconds,
Please.
I could actually say the following to the congressman who did not give me an opportunity to say anything. Number one, we have intensified efforts to dismantle the transnational criminal organizations and human smuggling networks in an unprecedented level. Number two, we've brought greater efficiency to the process of unaccompanied children and uniting them with a parent, legal sponsor, or other qualified family member here in the United States. And three, the prior administration took accompanied children and deliberately made them unaccompanied.
Mr. Secretary, my concern is with what is going to happen this year. Unprecedented number of refugees coming to the United States. And we should open our arms to those individuals that are fleeing war and devastation around the world. Again, from Ukraine, I would imagine we are going to probably get more than 1 million at our doorstep here this year. And soon as the Russian economy collapses, you have a whole lot more Russians here as well. And this is nothing new. For the last 2 years at the southern border, we've had Russian and Ukrainian undocumented individuals crossing the border. Your agents have told me that. And so my question to you, sir, how do we put together a program that's humane, looks at the refugees, admits them to the U.S., and also not forget about the Central Americans, the Syrians, other refugees that are also there waiting to be admitted to the United States?
Congressman, very briefly in the few seconds that I have. Number one, it is our view that the majority of Ukrainians that have fled their country, their sovereign nation, want to return there, number one. Number two, that is precisely why this administration is focused on safe, orderly, and humane pathways to obtain relief under the laws of the United States.
Sir, I'm running out of time. I just want to call your attention to these 2 photos I took at the border 3 weeks ago. This is the face of refugees coming to America.
The time of the gentleman has expired. Mr. Tiffany.
Mr. Mayorkas, in 2021, last year, at a Senate hearing, you said everyone that came out of Afghanistan, the disastrous pullout of Afghanistan, that they were fully vetted. Do you stand by that comment?
Yes, we conducted comprehensive security screening and vetting for those Afghanis.
Okay, thank you. Here's a headline from last year. Second major felon found on Afghan evacuation flight. Aggravated robbery by one, the other one, a rapist. They had been deported. They came back in on those flights. Here's a CNN document that says some Afghans fleeing their home country have arrived in the United States without paperwork. It goes on to say the approach from the administration has been get as many people on the plane as you can and we'll sort out the immigration stuff later. Some people land with no documents whatsoever, creating a very challenging work environment for the officers, the source said. Did you fully vet everyone?
Congressman, as I have stated before, we conducted comprehensive security and vetting screening of the individuals who arrived here under Operation Allies Welcome. We're extraordinarily proud of that program.
So you did not vet them before they left the Kabul airport?
Congressman,
did you vet them before they left the Kabul airport?
Congressman, we did not. What we did
okay, thank you very much.
What we did is we vetted them at third countries.
So let's
countries.
That's not what DHS and the camp commander said in Fort McCoy. They said they were still vetting people after they arrived, already had parole when they were in Fort McCoy in my state, Wisconsin. I want to continue with another question here.
Let me share with you how
last
the screening
month,
and vetting
the Department of
works.
Defense Inspector General confirmed at least 50 cases of Afghans with potential significant security concerns. The IG report also concluded the administration has absolutely no idea where most of them are. Did you fully vet those 50 that have potential significant security concerns?
Congressman, 2 quick points, if I may.
Did you vet them?
Congressman, may I answer?
You said you vetted all of them.
We screened and vetted, and I am familiar.
Screening and vetting are different. How many people completed the SIV process, the Special Immigrant Visa process, which is very detailed, especially when you're dealing with a country that is very high on the terror list. How many of them completed? Of the 77,000, how many completed the SIV process?
I can get that precise figure to you.
I look forward to hearing that from you, because that will be a really interesting thing to hear. You're very familiar with Title 8. You know Title 8, right? Section 5A. This shall be used only on a case-by-case basis for urgent humanitarian reasons or significant public benefit. In 1989, in a floor speech, Democrat Representative Morrison from Connecticut, Congress intended that the parole authority would be used for a temporary admission of individual aliens. Parole status is an unacceptable alternative to a more permanent and defined immigration status. Senator Simpson repeated the same thing in 1994. In 2008, your agency, USCIS, ICE, CBP, Memorandum of Agreement, parole is not to be used to circumvent normal visa processes and timelines. Are you complying with Title 8 in the INA?
We believe we are.
You believe you are,
Yes.
even though this is meant to be done on a case-by-case basis. Did you interview all 77,000?
Of the Afghan
evacuees? Did you interview every one of them?
Did I personally, or did the Department of Homeland Security personnel?
Yeah, did you do it
Yes,
on
they
a
did.
case-by-case basis and interview every one of them?
Congressman, those individuals were screened in third countries, not at Kabul airport for reasons that, of course, you well understand. They're screened and vetted in third countries. They are then manifested on the plane.
But they weren't, because many of them were screened in the United States at Fort McCoy in Wisconsin.
Congressman,
did you fully vet everyone you paroled from Afghanistan? I believe the answer is no. And so think about it. Think about it for a second. Here's a document you gave us this week. This is the grand plan. Biden administration, DHS, executing a comprehensive and deliberate strategy to secure our borders, build a safe, orderly, and humane immigration system. What is humane about people being sexually abused by these parolees? How about the woman at Fort Bliss, a soldier, female soldier, beat to a pulp by 5 evacuees? Is that humane?
Congressman, of course that isn't, and that is...
You have erased our borders.
Time of the gentleman has expired, Mr. Neguse.
That is addressed with the full force.
Mr. Chairman. The time of the gentleman has expired,
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Neguse.
May I complete my answer?
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Chairman, I'll be brief.
Mr. Chairman.
No, Mr.
The
Chairman,
time
the
is
witness be
Mr.
permitted to answer his
Mr.
question?
Negus's.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Mayorkas, would you care to respond to that last question? If you'd like?
That incident was met with the full force of law enforcement response. And I should say that the congressman misunderstands the screening and vetting process and the fact that it is a recurrent process. Even while the individual is in the United States, we conduct recurrent screening and vetting as a further layer of security. Thank you, Congressman, for giving me that chance.
Thank you. Mr. Secretary, first let me say thank you for coming before our committee today. And I want to express my gratitude and appreciation for your assistance during and after the Marshall Fire. As you know, on December 30th of 2021, a fire tore through my community in northern Colorado, the 2nd Congressional District of Louisville and Superior. We lost 1,000 homes and tragically 2 members of our community who perished during the fire. The very next day, you were the first cabinet secretary to reach out to me personally and to convey your grief over the events in my community and to convey your commitment on behalf of the Department of Homeland Security and FEMA to step up for our community when we needed the department. And I just want to say thank you for extending me and my community that courtesy. And we have been working with Administrator Criswell, who, of course, as you know, is a proud Coloradan, on the recovery from the Marshall Fire. As you well know, in Colorado and in the Rocky Mountain West, we no longer have fire seasons, but fire years. And we are likely to be besieged by wildfires for years to come. So the partnership between FEMA and our local communities and the state government couldn't be more important. And again, I want to thank you and Administrator Criswell for your cooperation in that regard. Switching gears, I'd like to talk about the threat of cyber attacks. Now, you touched on this in your written testimony and some of your oral testimony as well. During our hearing with FBI Assistant Director Vorden, which was last month, I mentioned that in Colorado, local government entities have been hit by ransomware attacks, as have large organizations like the University of Colorado. And I'd like to talk a little bit, Mr. Secretary, about how DHS is responding to those same threats. As part of the omnibus spending package, Congress passed the Cyber Incident Reporting for Critical Infrastructure Act. As you are aware, I'm sure, the legislation requires critical infrastructure companies that experience a hack to notify CISA in certain cases, including within 72 hours of discovering a cyber intrusion and within 24 hours of paying ransomware attackers. Wondering how DHS is working, number one, to ensure that this breadth of ownership doesn't result in security risks, particularly to our electric grid and water infrastructure. And then secondly, the law does leave some details to be hashed out by CISA via the rulemaking process, and I'm wondering how DHS is working with companies to ensure that the most essential information is captured.
Congressman, thank you so much. So very quickly, the threat of ransomware has only grown, and we developed in collaboration with the Department of Justice the first ever one-stop shop online to really provide information to the potentially affected and the affected community, stopransomware.gov. And it's really a resource for individuals and organizations of whatever size and of whatever resource to be able to address the threat of ransomware. And we, of course, have our advisors in Colorado and in every state throughout the country. The mandatory reporting legislation is really a game changer for us, and we're incredibly indebted to Congress for passing that piece of legislation. What we are going to implement is the notice of proposed rulemaking, and through that vehicle, through that regulatory vehicle, receive input from industry so that we can fashion the implementing regulations that address the cybersecurity challenge as well as the sensitivities of the business community, because they're going to have to report an incident very well while they are tackling the incident itself. And we want to be mindful of that and also not create a responsibility to report false alarms, which neither they should do nor we should be burdened with.
Well, thank you, Mr. Secretary, and I see my time will soon expire. I would just simply say I couldn't agree with you more about the legislation in particular and it being a game changer. There isn't a business or a local government in our country, in every one of our districts represented on this committee, that is not at risk from the threat of ransomware and cyber attacks. And so, again, the partnership, I think, between the department and local governments and small businesses couldn't be more important and timely, and I appreciate your work and the department's work in that regard.
Thank you, Congressman.
Mr. Chairman.
The gentleman's time has expired. I now recognize Mr. Issa for purposes of UC.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I ask unanimous consent that the assigned statement signed by 10 members of Congress and staff entitled, "We, the undersigned members of Congress and congressional staff, were informed by Customs and Border Protection leadership that they were under orders to begin processing at that time aliens who otherwise would have been ineligible for entry under Title 42, and it's signed by all that were present." I thank the gentleman.
Without objection, I recognize Mr. Correa for UC request.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to request unanimous consent to submit a open letter to for the record from former Defense Intelligence, Homeland Security, and cyber officials calling for national security review of congressional tech legislation.
Without objection, I now recognize Ms. Fischbach.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Secretary, I just don't know where to start. So many of my colleagues have asked questions that you either can't or won't answer. And I have a lot of questions for my constituents. Over 500 questions came in directly from my constituents because I don't think they don't see you doing anything. They don't see anything, your department doing anything to stop the flow over the southern border. And I would love to ask you all those questions, but I only have 5 minutes. So I will start with one that you probably won't have an answer for. Similar to Mr. Shabbat, I would love to know how many immigrants have been relocated to Minnesota.
Congresswoman, I will provide data with respect to relocation to the best of my ability.
Well, and since you don't have it here, I am formally requesting it now that you send that to my office, and I would appreciate, and you know what, on behalf of Mr. Shabbat, I would ask for you to send that to his office or anyone else who would request that, because I think that's important for our constituents to know. One of my colleagues also asked about your plan to stop the flow of illegal crossings at the southern border. And do you have a real plan? I mean, do you have a plan where there's action, where you are going to be doing something to actually stop that flow?
Oh, most certainly, Congresswoman, and I published details about that plan 2 days ago, and those preparations have been in the works for months and months. And in fact, I set up a Southern Border Coordinating Center to bring together the resources of the Department of Homeland Security, and not only the resources of our department, but the resources of the federal government in the interagency.
And when do you expect that to? When do you expect that to take effect, so that we can see something happening at the southern border?
The implementation is well underway, Congresswoman.
So it's in effect, it's working? I mean, are you seeing actual results of that plan?
Congresswoman, we are, and we are continuing to build on the plan. It is an advancing and increasing effort on the part of not only the Department of Homeland Security, but the entire relevant federal government agencies.
And Mr. Secretary, I would love for you to put together a little something to the effect that we could see, you could tell us what's actually happening, if there's actual results. I would love to have that to my office.
Congresswoman,
so thank you so much for that, and I'll be looking forward to seeing that. But can you tell me, what do you think securing the border really means? I mean, what does that mean to you, securing the border? Stopping the flow, slowing it? What does that really mean?
Congresswoman, that means effectively applying the laws of our country and making sure that we are maximizing the impact of the resources that we have to secure the border. And I very much look forward to providing you with information about the results of our plan, and I'll give you a shining example of the results from our targeting.
Well, I look forward to getting that in writing. You know, we are very short on time, and I only have a few minutes, and but I do want to know, how does releasing illegal aliens into the U.S. secure the border? How does that fit in with the definition of securing the border?
Congresswoman, under our laws, individuals who make a claim for asylum have a right to vindicate their claims in immigration court proceedings.
All right. Well, I understand that you're not going to address what I'm asking, because you're releasing them. I'm not talking about those necessarily asking for asylum. But it is my time, so I'm going to continue. And I just want you to know that some of those questions that I'm getting were asked here today, about how much are we spending on this, that you couldn't answer that one. Why are there no COVID protocols, and what are you really doing to secure the border?
Congresswoman, there are COVID.
Well, that was a question I had.
protocols.
I'm not asking it. I'm just telling you that was one of the questions I got. But I will follow up actually with your office, because I do want, there's a lot of questions that we have. Really quick, I want to change courses right here, because I got this morning. Recently, U.S. Customs and Border Protection made the decision to reduce hours at the port of entry in Lancaster, which is in my district. My office was told that the management engaged with stakeholders at the local, state, and federal level. The listed stakeholders were 2 local officials, the Democrat chairman of the House Homeland Security Committee, who doesn't live in my state, and 1 Democrat senator from my state. As the Congresswoman who represents the communities that port is, that is around the communities for that port, why was I not considered a stakeholder? Why were we not included at all? I mean, is there a reason why we weren't included in that discussion?
The gentlelady's time has expired. The witness may answer the question.
Congresswoman, I'm not familiar with the engagement that was held, the invitations that were distributed, but I will look into it, and we will get back to your office with that
I would
information.
absolutely appreciate that. So I will be expecting a few letters. Thank you.
The gentlelady yields back. Ms. McBath.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you, Secretary Mayorkas, for joining us today. And I know that you've had a very busy week up here on the Hill. And I really appreciate your time with us today, and for patiently, incredible, and also credibly answering all of our questions. And it has been mentioned already, immigration is one of the most important issues that DHS oversees. And immigration affects almost all sectors of American life, our family life, our economy, and education. And it's imperative that we have a highly functioning, fair, and efficient immigration system. And like many of my colleagues here today, my district, which is Georgia's 6th congressional district, is made up of a very large and vibrant immigrant community. And they are my neighbors, and they're my friends, and they're my coworkers. And as I've mentioned at a previous markup, in our town of Johns Creek and also Chamblee, about a third of the population there, they're made up of immigrants. And our district office caseworkers, they work tirelessly to help our immigrant populations get their visa applications processed. And something that we've faced time and time again, like many other offices, there are very, very heavy backlogs. So I'd like to ask what, if anything, is being done to fix the backlog of employment authorization documents. And we know that there have been attempts to really help alleviate these backlogs for certain non-immigrant visas, but we're still seeing very large numbers of constituents that are reaching out about DACA and TPS EADs that are just taking so many months to be processed.
Congresswoman, 3 quick things. Number one, I must champion, as I have previously in this hearing and otherwise, of course, the personnel of U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services who are doing Herculean work while being under-resourced. Number two, we are delivering processing efficiencies so that we can work through the backlog more expeditiously. And 3, we are seeking funding from Congress, and we are also promulgating a fee rule as we seek to and continue to hire more personnel to be able to work through the backlog and administer immigration benefits in a timely manner, as is our goal.
Well, thank you for that. And also, as a graduate of an HBCU, Virginia State University, and as an American concerned about the threat of white supremacy, I want to now turn to how DHS is responding to the bomb threats against HBCUs earlier this year. Now, during our hearing a little bit earlier, it was called The Rise in Violence Against Minority Institutions. We heard from experts on whether the government has done enough to combat violent right-wing extremism and white supremacy. And our witness, Dr. Jones, said, and I quote, he says, "I will say that there has been an uptick in my conversations with some of the joint terrorism task forces and the FBI and the Department of Homeland Security to pay more attention to this," end quote. So as arrests have still not been made in the investigations into bomb threats against many of our HBCUs, can you please describe for us what efforts the DHS is doing to prevent further threats or potential attacks on our historically Black colleges and universities?
Congresswoman, thank you. I engage with the presidents of the HBCUs to understand the impacts of threats on their respective institutions and to better understand their needs to meet the challenge of increasing threats. We are disseminating information to the HBCUs and other institutions similarly situated, both with respect to the threat landscape and what they could confront, and also providing information to them about how they can best secure their institutions. We've also looked into the availability of the Nonprofit Security Grant Program and whether some of those funds could indeed be allocated to HBCUs and similarly situated institutions, and indeed some of the HBCUs as nonprofit organizations do qualify for the grant programs, and we are working to make sure that information about the grant programs is widespread and easily accessible, and the grant funding itself is equally accessible as well. Those are some of the measures that we are taking.
Well, thank you so very much for patiently answering my questions. I know it's been very difficult today, and you've been a wealth of grace under fire. So thank you so much, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentlelady yields back. Mr. Massey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Mayorkas, there's been some debate today about the numbers for 2021, how many ICE arrests, detentions, removals have there been for aggravated felonies committed by non-citizens? I want to give you a chance to tell us what that number is.
Thank you very much, Congressman. Let me pull, if I can, the data sheet. In fiscal year 2021, enforcement and removal operations, the part of Immigration and Customs Enforcement, arrested 12,025 individuals convicted of aggravated felonies, nearly double the 6,815 arrested in fiscal year 2020. With respect to removals, in fiscal year 2021, Immigration and Customs Enforcement removed an average of 937 aggravated felons per month, the highest level ever recorded. 46% of ICE removals were for people convicted of felonies or aggravated felonies, compared to 18% during the previous 4 years and 17% the year before that.
Can I ask you, for the people who are watching this back home, aggravated felony is a term of art. Can you, a legal term?
A legal term.
Can you tell us what's included in aggravated felonies? Does it include homicides? What kind of crimes does it include?
It includes a series of serious crimes that Congress has identified as qualifying as aggravated felonies.
So that would be homicide, sexual assault, robbery, kidnapping. Those would be included.
I'd have to take a look at the precise statutory language.
Homicides.
There are also,
and
Congressman, if I may, there are also certain serious crimes. I would qualify them and describe them as serious crimes that are actually not defined as aggravated felonies, which is why we are actually dedicating our enforcement resources to those cases as well.
Thank you. So it does include murderers, rapists, armed robbers, and child molesters. According to the data, you know, I've got your report here that you presented. You give us the numbers for this year. 836,000 migrants have been released into the United States who don't have citizenship here or legal basis for being here. Since January 21st, 2021, Matt Gaetz, my colleague, asked you, will some of the 800,000 migrants that DHS has released into the United States since you've been in this position commit a crime? Do you remember what your answer was?
I believe I said to Congressman Gaetz that some very well might.
You said undoubtedly. How many of those are going to commit a rape?
Congressman, there are individuals.
How many of those are going to commit a murder?
You are speaking of individuals who are making a claim for humanitarian relief.
How many gotaways made it across the border, according to, from your estimates from DHS?
Congressman,
Various people.
Can I answer your question?
We got to. How many? I asked you a question. How many of those are going to commit rape, murder, armed robbery, or molest a child? How many of the 800,000 that you have released in here that you told my colleague will undoubtedly commit a crime, and you've just characterized the types of crimes they're going to commit? You're bragging on how many of you have arrested, but how many of you not arrested? And by the way, I want a very specific answer to this. Were those crimes committed in another country, or were those crimes committed in the United States?
Congressman,
were those crimes committed in the United States or another country?
You are describing individuals who are seeking asylum in our country as with a broad brush.
Okay, who were you describing? Let me give you a chance. Who were you describing when you mentioned that you've arrested murderers, rapists, armed robbers, and child molesters? Were they seeking asylum?
Congressman, those individuals are arrested, detained.
How did they get here?
From the United States.
How did they get here?
Congressman, they were encountered at...
Do you have operational control of the border?
I've answered that question a number of times, and yes, we do.
How many people are coming across every day that you can't control?
Congressman, I can give you that number if you'd like.
Wouldn't it be better for the United States if we didn't allow these felons to come into the country? If we didn't give them a chance to commit murders, rapes, child molestation, and armed robbery.
Time
You
of
just
the
told
gentleman,
us today
the time of the gentleman has expired.
that you arrest these very
time
people
of the
for these
gentleman has
crimes.
expired. The
Can I-
witness may answer the question.
Thank you. The congressman has asked me to disobey the laws of the United States of America because the laws of the United States of America provide for asylum, provide for humanitarian relief, provide for the protection of individuals who need it under our laws because they fear persecution by reason of their membership in a
You have
particular-
discretion to remove them from this country. You did not, and they commit crimes, violent crimes.
The gentleman's time has expired. The witness is permitted to answer the gentleman's last question. He's in the process of doing so.
By reason of their fear of persecution, by reason of their membership in a particular social group. And that body of people that the United States law permits to make a claim for relief under laws Congress passed should not be painted with a broad brush of criminality. In fact, my family, and I included, are beneficiaries of those laws because a standard of fear of persecution applies to refugees as well. And we fled the communist takeover of Cuba to enjoy the freedoms and liberties and the democracy that makes this country shine. And we are intensely proud and immensely proud of our humanitarian relief programs. And I will not disobey the laws of humanitarian relief that Congress has passed.
Gentleman's time has expired. Mr. Stanton.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Secretary Mayorkas, I represent the border state of Arizona. As a former state deputy attorney general and a longtime elected official in the state of Arizona, I understand the border and its complexities very well, as do Arizonans. We know that being a border state is helpful to our economy. We understand that immigrants make us stronger, which is why most Arizonans support modernizing our nation's immigration system, including a pathway to citizenship. But we also know that our border must be secure. And if it isn't secure, there are real consequences that Arizonans pay the price for. Opioids and other drugs come across and wreak havoc on our communities. Cartels and traffickers can extort and smuggle migrants in abhorrent conditions across our dangerous deserts, sometimes killing them. And when the federal government is overwhelmed, it too often passes the buck. It places an incredible burden on local law enforcement, on local communities, on our local nonprofits. I paid careful attention to your testimony yesterday, Mr. Secretary, as well as your commentary earlier today. I agree with you that the Trump administration got border policy wrong. Their approach was inhumane, ineffective, and harmed the federal government's long-term ability to process migrants through the system. You are also right that migration issues are not unique to the United States. Increased migration is a worldwide crisis in which human tragedy in the developing world is putting pressure on countries like the United States. This administration did not create the problem, but managing it effectively is your responsibility. And what was outlined in the memo you released on Tuesday, just a couple days before today's hearing, is not at all sufficient to handle what will come our way once Title 42 restrictions are lifted. Those on the ground in Arizona know that the entire chain, starting with the Border Patrol and ICE to local law enforcement, nonprofit refugee centers, even our international airport in Phoenix, is already overwhelmed. Just yesterday, I met with a local Arizona mayor who has been seeking assistance from DHS for months so that his community can be prepared to deliver necessary services. He told me that today they're processing about 300 migrants per day through a local nonprofit, but they've been told by the federal law enforcement to expect that the number to jump to 1,000 per day by this summer. They've been telling your department that at this time, they're not ready. And when migrants can't get help at a nonprofit, where will they go, Mr. Secretary? Putting more pressure on a system that can't handle it carries a significant risk of creating a full-scale humanitarian crisis on American soil, for which the White House and your department will be solely responsible. No person who cares about migrants should want that. It's clear to me that the federal government is not prepared, not even close. One example, your memo acknowledges that even with Title 42 restrictions, in place, Customs and Border Patrol was so overwhelmed and just 2 months ago that it had to increase in its numbers of agents deployed along the southwest border by more than 600. You proposed adding a few hundred more. But Mr. Secretary, no thinking person believes that modest staffing improvements will put the federal government in a position to handle triple the number of crossings. Not a chance. So I have a long list of questions for you, and I know that we won't get all of them here today. I will be following up in writing, but let me get through as many as I can in the short time left. Phoenix Sky Harbor Airport is one of the busiest in America, and since January, airport staff has been even busier taking on duties that they shouldn't be asked to, assisting migrants in making travel plans. Leaders at the airport have told me that up to 600 migrants who have been released by CBP and ICE custody are dropped at the airport every day. At the busiest times of the day, most are not ready to travel. Many are at high risk with health concerns and few resources. Airport staff has sprung into action. They're setting up phone banks, providing translation services, and many are even donating clothing and food. They're making trips to the store to purchase belts and shoes and shoelaces with their personal funds. They're delivering diapers and formula to mothers and infants. But airport staff is maxed out. And even with the expected surge this summer, there will come a breaking point. DHS needs to provide additional support to its nonprofit partners to ensure that all migrants arriving at transportation hubs like Sky Harbor Airport are better prepared to travel. Mr. Secretary, will you commit to getting your partners the resources that they desperately need?
Congressman, one of the 6 pillars of our plan is to bolster the capacity of nonprofit organizations and to coordinate with local and state officials. So that is directly responsive. And another part of our plan is to work with our countries to the south, our partners throughout the region, to address their border management opportunities and responsibilities, which is why I was in Panama last week with Secretary of State Antony Blinken. And we will be prepared, and our plan is comprehensive, and I look forward to sharing with you some of the details of that plan to address some of the concerns that you have expressed, because we're aware of those concerns. We've been planning against those concerns for months.
Gentleman's time has expired. Ms. Spartz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Secretary. In your 6-point plan, how many migrants that went through due process you plan to remove this year? Do you have a number that you plan removals? Do you have a number?
We don't have a predictive number.
So you don't have, in your plan, you don't set a number, right? You don't plan that this is so many, the minimum people do. So you don't have a number for that?
No, because it's
Okay.
a
Do you
function,
believe-
Congresswoman, of a number of different variables, but what we will do, and as our plan indicates, is we will maximize the effectiveness
Well,
of our
maximize does not
recess.
work. I would like to hear the number at some point, but let's just next. Do you believe, in light of everything that's happening right now in Europe and the war, big war, do you think there are some significant national security concerns at our border also? Just tell me yes or no.
I believe that, ma'am, the situation, Congresswoman, that any individual who seeks to do us
But I'm talking
harm
about there
who's
is increased risk at the border due to war in Europe. Do you believe there's an increased national security risk at the border due to war in Europe? Yes or no?
I want to make sure I understand your question. Does the number of individuals...
No. I'm talking about an individual. Do you assess, as a chief executive of agencies that provide border security, there is increased risk of security, national security risk at our southern border due to war, major war happening in Europe? Do you believe the risk is escalated, is increased?
By reason of what has occurred
The
in
war,
Europe?
yes, in Europe and the war in Ukraine.
What we are seeing...
Yes or no? Like, just answer. Do you have increased risk or not?
What we are seeing, Congresswoman, if you would allow me, what we are seeing is an increased number of individuals seeking humanitarian relief.
So you don't think there is a national security risk? Okay, how many people do you think, do you believe that Border Patrol is actually overwhelmed and right now and have a really low morale? What do you think?
Congresswoman, the morale in U.S. Customs and Border Protection in the Border Patrol is low. There's no question.
Do you believe they're overwhelmed?
About that, and they are under strain, which is why
Because they're
we
very
are taking,
overwhelmed. Okay, so
which
the
is
question is, but how many people,
taking,
do you have a number, how many people were released by Border Patrol under prosecutorial authority without given notice to appear? Just get in the country because they don't have even capacity to handle. Do you have that number?
Congresswoman, yes, I do.
So what is that number?
Because it's not.
Just a number. How many people were released
Congresswoman,
without
would you allow me to answer your question?
Yeah, please do, because
your
I need to have more questions, so I need to
I understand, but your
precise,
question
please.
is imprecise.
Yes.
Because right now, those individuals are being released on either a notice to appear or parole with alternatives to detention. We no longer use the notice to report that we used.
So how many was,
fiscal
when
year?
you used, well, how many were that reduced without just innocent? How many? Do you have that number when you did that?
Yes, I do. Your question is, how many individuals were released on a notice to appear?
No, without
for example?
it. Without it.
In fiscal year 2021, because right now we are not
Okay,
using
please,
the notice to report.
yeah, just give me the number. I don't need the full-blown statements.
In fiscal year 2021, 144,383 were transferred to ICE enforcement.
No, not ICE. They're actually given to them, go directly from the border in the country without any documentation. Under prosecutorial authority, I've been in the border 4 times, and that happened. You're not aware that it's happening? In the Texas border, you're not aware about that?
You're asking your question.
My question is where the Border Patrol has no ability to do processing, so they just send them without documentation inside the country, get on the bus, and they go there. So you're not aware that it's happening under prosecutorial authority?
No, what
Okay, if you're not aware, let's talk about it. Are you aware how many people, like I just was at one section of the border, and I talked to Border Patrol. They detect about, in small section, about 300 people per day going undetected, not caught, but they see on camera. Only 25% of their sector has camera. Do you know how many people cross this border? Do you have a number, estimate, that were not detected by any cameras and couldn't be stopped by Border Patrol because they have a limited capacity? Do you have an estimate?
Are you asking me how many gotaways?
No, not got away. They just pretty much crossed the border. Do you have that number? What is your estimate? How many people?
I just want to make sure I understand your
You
question.
understand that there are some people that cross the border, we see on camera, no resources to catch, and some border sections do not have camera. What is your estimate? How many people can cross the border, be completely undetected? What is your estimate?
Completely undetected?
Yes. What is your estimate?
Or observed and not apprehended as well?
Both, not undetected, because we don't observe some of them. Let's say how many undetected, not observed.
Ms. Congresswoman, your question's quite imprecise. In fiscal year of
I just don't understand that you don't have questions on this
question.
question.
The gentlelady's time has expired. The witness may answer the question.
In fiscal year 2021, there were 389,155 gotaways.
It's not gotaways.
The gentlelady's time has expired. The witness.
But I think you're not answering my question, and I will answer it in writing because this is
The gentlelady's time has
incompetent.
expired. The gentlelady no longer has the floor. The witness is in the process of answering her last question and may proceed.
I answered it, Mr. Chairman. I gave the figure.
Not.
Very well. The time of the
Gotaways.
gentlelady has
You did
expired.
not.
Ms. Dean.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to you, Secretary Mayorkas, for being here, for your service to our country in trying to solve serious problems. So I thank you and your team for that work. The indecency with which you have been treated by many people on this dais is staggering to me. And it reveals the lack of seriousness to solve problems, the lack of interest to solve problems. And it reminds me of a different time of disinformation, of bigotry, of political theater. It reminds me of a beautiful speech given by Senator Margaret Chase Smith, speaking up against Senator McCarthy and his bigotry and disinformation campaign. Part of what she said is, freedom of speech is not what it used to be in America. She complained, it has been so abused by some and it is not exercised by others. And she asked her fellow Republicans not to ride to political victory on the 4 horsemen of calumny: fear, ignorance, bigotry, and smear. Sadly, I see those 4 horsemen riding today. We need to put an end to it and be serious about the problems that we face. And so rather than ask you the questions I was going to ask you, I will list the issues I am interested in and will submit them for the record and submit them to you, and I look forward to having a further conversation with you, but I'm going to give you a chance to speak. Some of the three or four issues I'm interested in, we have a detention center in my area, Burke's Detention Center. I would like to see it closed. It has a recent history of sexual assault of one of the detained. I'm very interested in the process around the 100,000 number and how the department will ensure that Ukrainians can navigate that system. I'm hoping that you are considering TPS for Ethiopians who really are suffering tremendously. And I think our country should be offering that as we have to other people fleeing. And of course, Afghan resettlement. Those are my areas of interest, but I'd rather give the rest of my time to let you speak, because so often you were misquoted, you were misrepresented, and most importantly, you were not allowed to speak. The floor is yours.
Congresswoman, thank you very much. I have so much to say in response to the misstatements that have been made and directed at me that actually I'm going to use the time most productively to address very quickly the four areas that you have identified. We have focused our efforts on detention centers and ensuring that our standards for detention centers are abided by. And detention centers that do not abide by that, those standards will be addressed, and we've addressed a number of them by closing them because of their repeat offenses. I've outlined the paths to deliver on the President's commitment of providing humanitarian relief for 100,000 Ukrainians who need that relief here in the United States. I welcome the opportunity to speak with you about the efforts to resettle Afghan individuals from Afghanistan. We have Operation Allies Welcome, which we've been working with civil society in that regard, the business community, Welcome.us, and other organizations. And I will look at the situation in Ethiopia with my partners in the Department of State. That is an issue that already we are looking into, but I will check on its status, and I very much appreciate the question. Obviously, we are very proud in this country to be a nation of immigrants and a nation of laws, and we abide by our identity in both. And it is quite regrettable that individuals who seek humanitarian relief in this country, who qualify for humanitarian relief, are being painted with a brush of criminality. And in terms of being a nation of laws, when individuals do not qualify for relief, they are removed. Individuals are placed in immigration proceedings where they make their claims, and an immigration judge rules on their claims. Those who qualify are provided the relief to which they are entitled under our laws. Those who don't are removed.
I thank you for your seriousness and your decency, and I seek unanimous consent to enter into the record the beautiful speech by Margaret Chase Smith of June 1st, 1950, Declaration of Conscience.
Without objection. The gentlelady's time has expired. Mr. Fitzgerald.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Secretary, I think some of the level of frustration I think you're hearing from members here today is because many of the members on the Judiciary Committee have done, as you're well aware, multiple border visits. And I think oftentimes the way it's characterized or the way it's been presented by yourself and sometimes members of your team doesn't necessarily match up with what we see on the ground on these visits. So let me ask you this, though. Mr. Secretary, on one of those visits last week, there were members of this committee that were down at the border in San Diego at the site that's oftentimes referred to, I guess, as Well Draw. And on this visit, as well as other members that were with me, the issue of human trafficking continues to come up. And I feel strong about it because I think it's a driving force in just about everything that you could characterize it as or what it kind of touches. It's all encompassing. So, the high likelihood of release is what's motivating more and more people around the globe to put themselves in the hands of criminals, which is the big part of, I think, what's creating the issue at our southern border. I'll just say, easy access to the United States, it's just irresistible that you're going to continue to have individuals, especially from the southern hemisphere, continue to want to come to America. And if we don't get control of what happens to those individuals once they hit that southern border, I don't think this issue is going away anytime soon. So, I think we can agree that human trafficking, it's clearly illegal. I think you would agree with that, right?
Of course.
And we can agree that human trafficking it's real. It's really happening out there. We hear about it all the time, I think, when we're at the border. Or even on the backside, law enforcement back in our districts. I'm from the 5th Congressional in Wisconsin, and we hear about it all the time. It might take the form of a local truck driver who's somehow comes in contact with it. Law enforcement finds out about it later on. So it's a terrible thing. I think we can agree. And I think we can agree that many of the illegal aliens that are coming across right now are being smuggled or being ushered through by coyotes, as we just heard about. And it was somewhat demonstrated to us again and again every time you're at the border. So since we agree on those kind of small sets of facts, let me just go back to the big question. Why aren't we finishing the wall? What we saw in San Diego were gaps, and then stories of materials that had been there on the ground, and then suddenly Border Patrol agents noticing that someone had come and picked up those materials, and where did they go? There was a kind of a mystery that was in place for some time, and then they found out later that those materials were shipped to Texas. So, I know it's kind of the big question, but why aren't we finishing the wall? And then I can't believe that it wouldn't help funnel so that agents would know who's coming and going on the border, which is probably half the battle. Not necessarily sealing off America on the southern border, but getting control of it. And then just based on human trafficking, which I said earlier is what I consider more of a motivator. There's got to be a reason for people to try and usher individuals who clearly don't have the wherewithal on their own back and forth. And then the other thing, not to mention even the illegal drugs, which is probably another great motivator in this whole thing. So can you answer that for me? Answer the simple stuff. Why aren't we finishing the wall? And why aren't we making an attempt to clearly control and close the border right now?
Number of points, Congressman. Number one, the funds used to build the wall, not the most effective use of those funds in achieving border security, number one. Number two, I've approved approximately 68 projects to complete gaps and gates. Number three, we've intensified our efforts against the smuggling organizations for precisely the reason you articulate. Four, the smuggling organizations spread misinformation, and it's why we counter that misinformation.
I'm going to cut you off right there. I got one more question. Let me just
The
jump.
gentleman's time has expired. Ms. Escobar.
Mr. Chair,
Thank you,
there was
Mr.
1 second
Chairman.
left when I tried to ask the question.
Ms. Escobar.
Can I get my time back?
Mr. Chair?
Ms. Escobar.
Mr. Chairman,
Restart the clock.
thank you so much.
cut him off for the
Secretary
second
Mayorkas, thank you so much for being here. And let me from the onset apologize to you, your family, and your staff for the sickening, breathtakingly xenophobic political theater that has occurred at this hearing, which has included attacking your family. I know that your family is profoundly proud of you and your service to our nation.
Strike those words.
Unfortunately, for some of my colleagues,
The general.
Just accuse us generally of making xenophobic remarks.
Mr. Chairman?
Nothing wrong with that.
There's nothing wrong with that?
Mr. Roy, can you stop eating into my time, please? I did not do that to you. Have some
I'm
respect
not eating
for
your
me.
time. I'm making a point of
We're
order.
eating her. The gentlelady will continue.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Mayorkas, unfortunately, for some of my colleagues, there is no bottom. But these are the same people who praised Donald Trump's immigration strategy, which included separating small children from the arms of their mother. I'd like to enter into the record the article from Axios, House Republicans Plot to Impeach Mayorkas, and the April 25th, 2022 letter addressed to Mr. Mayorkas outlining that plot. I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record. Mr. Chairman?
Without objection.
Thank you. I hope the American people are watching this, and to those who are, let it be absolutely clear that the majority of my Republican colleagues are showing you, the American people, that they're not interested in addressing our country's challenges. Their goal is instead to feed our nation a regular diet of hate and rage because that's what they believe will win them elections. I hope Americans are as sickened by this as I am. I hope members of their party with integrity and decency will rebuke their colleagues for the way they've degraded this body and themselves today. I am the only member of this committee who represents a border district, the only one born and raised in a border district, the only one who's chosen to stay and live and raise my children in a beautiful, vibrant border district. What we are seeing at the border today is a challenge that began decades ago, but has been neglected by Congress after Congress. It should be no surprise that the situation has grown only more challenging as a result of inaction. And much of what has suddenly outraged my Republican colleagues has been going on for years, including during the Trump era. We talk about root causes of migration. There's one we don't talk about enough, and that's Congress's inaction. Immigration reform, which hasn't happened in decades, won't eliminate migration, but it sure would help alleviate the pressure. So why won't my Republican colleagues work with us on it? To quote the ranking member of this committee, Jim Jordan, from his opening remarks, quote, "It's intentional, it's by design. They don't want things to change." Secretary Mayorkas, I'm going to ask you just a few questions. If you could just please yes or no. Secretary Mayorkas, in your time as the Secretary of Homeland Security, have any of my Republican colleagues on this committee asked you for your thoughts on how we can best address the challenges at the border?
Not to my recollection, Congresswoman.
Secretary Mayorkas, my Republican colleagues believe that dealing with migration should happen at the border with walls and rapid expulsion. Have hundreds of miles of border wall or 2.5 years of Title 42 slowed, deterred, or eliminated migration?
Congresswoman, it's very difficult with respect to the wall. Of course, we've seen an increase.
Well, let me ask you this: has it eliminated migration?
It has not.
Did Donald Trump end migration?
He did not, Congresswoman.
So their strategy hasn't worked. We've tried their strategy. In fact, we have focused fundamentally, singularly on their strategy for decades. Their strategy is don't reform outdated immigration laws and only deter at the border. Hasn't worked. They've called it a failure. If Congress did its job and legislated, Mr. Secretary, do you think that would help the situation at the border?
That is our best chance for an enduring solution, Congresswoman.
Thank you, Secretary Mayorkas. I would tell, again, the American public that Congress is not doing its job, loves to point the finger, loves to shirk from its responsibility. House Democrats have delivered bill after bill, only to see our Republican colleagues vote against them. One last thing, Secretary Mayorkas, Governor Abbott has engaged in all sorts of antics that have shut down the border and that have led to 4 deaths by suicide of service members who are at Operation Lone Star. Has that stopped migration or made our border more secure?
Congresswoman, it has not.
One final thing, actually. Would love to work with you
The gentlelady's time is expired.
on reforming
The gentlelady's
personnel
time is expired.
staffing model. Thank
For
you.
the purpose of a UC request, Mr. Biggs.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As a person who was born and raised in a border district, I have here a stack of letters requesting Secretary Mayorkas to respond to. at least 6 letters. I'd like to
UC
have those put into the record.
Without objection, Mr. Benz.
I have a UC.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I'm sorry, Mr. Jordan for a UC request.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to ask unanimous consent to enter into the record a Washington Times article from March of this year, quoting ICE sources, saying that ICE data on aggravated felons is, quote, a shell game with numbers that are not reliable.
Without objection, Mr. Benz.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Secretary, for your patience. I'm from Oregon, and we have a situation with our southern 4 counties involving cartels growing massive amounts of marijuana and utilizing folks without the benefit of documentation in those operations. We have asked Attorney General Merrick Garland for help. I specifically wrote letters to him twice asking for 80 people to help. You have asked actually for, I think, a number of people to help you in your district or in your department, but you've encountered the problems with direct hire or as opposed to standard hire. And you've asked actually for direct hire be given back, the authority be given back to you. Would you please reassert your request to the folks that are in charge of this, the Director of Office of Personnel, and get us some help in Southern Oregon so we can begin to head off some of the incredible damage the cartels are doing utilizing, I'm going to say, undocumented immigrants in that space. I was one of the people that went to the border just a few days ago, went down to San Diego. I saw, of course, that the detention facilities are dramatically inadequate and that folks are being released into the United States when they don't fit in the detention facility, which is right now. We found out that there was no means of finding folks once they are released, no way of tracking them. We found out that there's not the full and complete background analysis on these folks as they come in that could be done, being done. And just as Congressman Ice has said, Title 42 is currently being ignored. We're not sure who gave that order, but that's what's happening. The Border Patrol is overwhelmed, and they need help. I was somewhat surprised when you indicated that you would, I think you didn't really use the word welcome, but you could certainly put to work the 20,000 folks that it was suggested we prevented from being hired. But I have here, which I would ask be offered into the record, it is your budgets. Actually, it's the FY 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, and 22 budgets for your department, the CBP, the ICE, EOIR, and CIS. And I think the budget tells a story of what you really want to do because it shows how much money you're asking for or not asking for in each of these spaces. For example, for the Border Patrol, this year it's $18 billion, fiscal year, I'm sorry, last year was $18 billion, this year it's $16 billion. For some reason, the amount that you asked for is less by $2 billion for Border Patrol. Next year, it goes back to $17 billion, but still far less than the $20 billion that they had available in 2020. In ICE, this goes right to the heart of whether you are really truly asking for, planning on picking up people across the United States. Your budget drops from the $9 billion in 2020 down to $8 billion in 2023. So I would suggest that that shows better than anything what your real plans are, which is not to take people out of the United States that are here illegally. Finally, I think it's incredibly important that people actually look at the fact sheet that President Biden has sent out to commitment to modernize our immigration system. Almost every element in this so-called fact sheet has nothing to do with securing the border. There is one bullet point at the end that talks about it. The rest of them talk about how to facilitate those who immigrate, how to help those who immigrate. Now, it needs to be important. This one thing that gets lost in this, that we Republicans support legal immigration. We want legal immigration. But what you are doing, your administration, is failing to protect the border and making it almost impossible to correctly address issues of immigration. So when people become upset and angry, as the folks that I represent are, back in the little state of Oregon, they wonder why in the world, by throwing the border open, you are making it so hard to get help up on our farms and our ranches and using H-2A and H-2B and H-2C programs. So what I'm trying to say to you is, your failures to do what you should be doing are making it almost impossible to get valid and needed and absolutely necessary immigration reform. With that, I yield to the ranking member, Mr. Jordan.
Thank you, gentlemen. Mr. Secretary, who's Nina Jankowicz?
She is the newly appointed individual in our Office of Policy in the Department of Homeland Security. And
Is she the new executive director of the
disinformation?
Is she the new executive director for Disinformation Governance Board?
She is the executive director of the Disinformation Governance Board.
And is this the same individual who said the dossier was real and the Hunter Biden laptop story was false? Is that the individual who's now running the Disinformation Governance Board?
I'm not familiar with those statements.
Been reported widely.
I'm not familiar with those
I'm
statements.
just asking that.
The gentleman's time has expired. For the purpose
is
of
an
a
eminently
unanimous
qualified-
consent request, Ms. Jackson-Lee.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Unanimous consent to submit into the record DHS Secretary of Defense border policies under intense grilling, where a member from Louisiana again cites an impeachment of Mayorkas talking points. TSA, as unanimous consent, TSA announces measure to implement gender-neutral screening at its checkpoints regarding transgender, and I thank the Secretary for that unanimous consent. School leaders say HBCUs are undeterred after a series of bomb threats. As unanimous consent, bomb threats targeting U.S. black colleges investigated as hate crimes. And finally, NBA's Houston Rockets face cyber attack by ransomware group. As unanimous consent to submit into the record.
Without objection, Ms. Ross.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Secretary Mayorkas. Thank you for all the work that you and the Biden administration have done to preserve the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals program, or DACA. I was pleased to see that the administration engaged in notice and comment rulemaking to strengthen and protect this vital program. However, the proposed rulemaking fails to address the needs of a group often referred to as the documented dreamers. These are young people who have grown up in the United States as dependents of non-immigrant visa holders, but age out of their visas at age 21 due to the decades-long backlog in the immigration system. Around the country, over 200,000 of these documented dreamers live in limbo, struggling to find a pathway to permanent residency and ineligible for many of the opportunities that their peers who were born in the United States can access. I've heard from countless young people in my district who dream of giving back to the country in which they've spent nearly all their lives. However, backlogs, along with other hurdles in the legal immigration system, have made this dream an impossibility for many documented dreamers. And as you may know, I've introduced bipartisan, bicameral legislation to address this problem. However, there may be an administrative solution through you. Former Secretary Napolitano's original June 15, 2021 DACA memorandum only requires one to be present in the U.S. on June 15, 2012, in addition to meeting other requirements under the program. However, under the DHS implemented DACA, the agency stated that the applicants must have been physically present on June 15, 2012, and have no lawful status on that date. That means documented dreamers who were here legally on June 15, 2021, but have subsequently lost status because they've aged out, are not eligible for DACA. Such individuals were not considered ineligible under the initial Napolitano memo. Is the department considering expanding DACA to include these documented dreamers? And if not, is there a reason they're not being included given the original memo? And I have written 2 letters to your office in support of the documented dreamers and have yet to get a response.
Congresswoman, first of all, I will follow up to make sure that you do receive a response to the letters that you've transmitted to us. The 2012 program was implemented to address those with most acute vulnerabilities. The point you make with respect to individuals who should have access to relief because they've known the United States as their home and have contributed to this country, speaks of the imperative to pass immigration reform, to pass legislation to provide a path for those individuals whom you identify. We currently do not have a plan. The focus is on the regulation to fortify the existing DACA program, and I'd welcome the opportunity to speak with you about the concerns that you rightly express for documented dreamers as you've identified them.
As a follow-up question, the House has passed the American Dream and Promise Act, which includes both the current DACA recipients, and make no mistake, they absolutely have to keep their status, and documented dreamers, and then of course extends protection for folks with temporary protected status. What is your office doing to encourage our friends in the Senate to see the need to pass this bill as well?
Congresswoman, I'd be pleased to follow up with your question to address the legislative activity that is underway. We remain hopeful for legislative reform, and I note very powerfully that our president sent to Congress a legislative package on his very first day in office.
The gentlelady's time has expired. Ms. Bush.
I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Ms. Bush.
Thank you. St. Louis, and I thank you, Secretary Mayorkas, for being here with us today. As a country, we have been unified in our response to the crisis in Ukraine. Your department, Secretary Mayorkas, recently unveiled a plan to accelerate admissions from Ukraine with a goal of admitting up to 100,000 Ukrainian refugees. We know that we have a legal and a moral obligation to welcome those fleeing persecution, wars, and famine. Does the department consider the conditions in the home country of the individual who crosses when assessing for the use of Title 42? For example, is this why Ukrainian nationals coming through our southern border are currently exempt from Title 42?
Congressman, we have built pathways, safe, orderly, and humane pathways for the Ukrainian individuals seeking relief to access the United States. The humanitarian parole program that we have termed Uniting for Ukraine, the refugee process for which we have deployed our personnel overseas, and of course, the visa programs that the Department of State traditionally and historically has administered. As a category of individuals, Ukrainians are not necessarily exempt from Title 42. We provide individualized exemptions depending on acute vulnerabilities, claims under the Convention Against Torture. But what we are really doing is implementing safe and orderly pathways so that individuals do not travel to Mexico with the intent of crossing through a port of entry and into the United States. That is not the safest way to proceed, and that is precisely one of the reasons, just one of the reasons, why we implemented the measures that I have described, to build an orderly and safe way to provide humanitarian relief in the proudest traditions of this country.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Secretary. Last year, DHS designated Haiti for temporary protected status to Haiti. In making that decision, DHS noted that Haiti is grappling with a deteriorating political crisis, violence, and a staggering increase in human rights abuses. Haiti faces the challenges of rising food insecurity and malnutrition, waterborne disease epidemics. Similar conditions exist for Cameroon, which was finally granted TPS status last week. Given this, can you explain why Haitian, Cameroonian, and others fleeing poverty, violence, and war are not exempt from Title 42?
Congresswoman, our experts, not only in U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, but also in the Department of State, review country conditions to determine which countries are eligible for temporary protected status based on the statutory criteria that are set forth. And you correctly note that we reviewed the country conditions last year in Haiti and granted temporary protected status for individuals already resident in the United States from Haiti. We actually, in light of the tragic assassination of the Haitian president last year, extended the period. We have not made a determination that, in fact, a further designation of Haiti is warranted under the statutory criteria. And therefore, we have not extended temporary protected status beyond that which we granted last year. You correctly note as well that our review of the country conditions in Cameroon led us to grant temporary protected status to Cameroonians. Our experts review country conditions against the statutory criteria, the statutory program, and we exercise our discretion accordingly.
Thank you. Reclaiming my time. Earlier this year, I led 100 members of Congress in sending a letter to the administration requesting a departmental review of our immigration system and the disparate treatment of Black migrants. Yes or no, Secretary, are you aware of the disparate treatment of Black migrants at the border?
I would respectfully disagree with that assertion. One of our core principles is equal application of the law in a non-discriminatory manner. I think our designation of temporary protected status for Haitian nationals resident in the United States last year, our recent declaration of...
Reclaiming my time, I have another question. Has the department ever conducted a review of disparate treatment of Black migrants?
The gentlelady's time has expired. The witness may answer the question.
I'm sorry, if the question could be repeated, I didn't quite catch it. I apologize, Mr. Chairman.
That's fine, that's fine. Has the department ever conducted a review of disparate treatment of Black migrants?
We have, Congresswoman, a statutorily created Office for Civil Rights and Civil Liberties. I will consult with that office to see whether our department has ever conducted such a review, and we will be back in touch with your office.
The time of the gentlelady has expired. This concludes today's hearing. We thank Secretary Mayorkas for participating. Without objection, all members will have 5 legislative days to submit additional written questions for the witness or additional materials for the record. I will note that there are 2 votes on the floor right now. Without objection, the hearing is adjourned.